Chapter 708. When Qin Xuan heard this, he looked at Hua Wuying in surprise. He didn't expect that the Zeus technology gloves were actually Hua Wuying's family heirloom. Are you surprised? As Hua Wuying recalled the past, the expression on her face gradually became complicated. To others, the Zeus technology gloves might be a very powerful and terrifying Tao artifact. However, to me, the Zeus technology gloves are an item that has brought me an unknown disaster. Back then, my father established the Zeus Technology Research Institute in the Air Center, specializing in the production of magic weapons. One day, he suddenly had an idea to produce a magic weapon that could be activated by the power of the Star Stone. The higher the level of the Star Stone, the more power it contained, and the more powerful the magic weapon would be. At that time, this idea didn't attract too much attention. It wasn't until 3 years later that my father made the Zeus Technology Glove and tested the power of the Zeus Technology Glove in public. After that, everything changed. Even if the lowest level of third-grade star stones were used, the Zeus Technology Gloves could at least exert the power of a low-grade Tao tool. And the higher the level of star stones used, the stronger the power of the Zeus Technology Gloves. In the test, the highest level of star stones used was a first-grade star stone. The power of the Zeus Technology Gloves had already surpassed that of a mid-grade Tao tool. Some people predicted that if a top-grade star stone was used, the power of the Zeus Technology Gloves might reach the level of a high-grade Tao tool. Do you know what high-grade Tao tool means? In the entire Air Center, there are only 2 high-grade Tao tools, and they are respectively controlled by 2 peak nascent soul stage powerhouses. The appearance of the Zeus Technology Gloves broke the balance between the two. If someone got the Zeus Technology Gloves, they might be able to compete with a nascent soul stage powerhouse. The structure of the Air Center will be completely changed because of this. At that time, after the test, my father was completely stunned because in his expectation, the strongest power of the Zeus Technology Gloves should only be equivalent to the level of a spirit treasure. He didn't expect the power of the Zeus Technology Gloves to be so powerful. At the same time, he also expected how terrifying the impact of the Zeus Technology Gloves would be, but at that time, it was too late for him to prevent the test results from leaking out. However, before my father could finish the analysis, the Zeus Technology Research Institute was attacked. In order to prevent the bad guys from getting the research results of the Zeus Technology Gloves, my father destroyed all the research data. Those people wanted to take the Zeus Technology Gloves, but my father used the Zeus Technology Gloves to kill them all. However, my father was also seriously injured. When I arrived at the scene, he only had time to give me the gloves. He didn't have time to give me the gloves, but he didn't even have time to give me the gloves. He didn't want the bad guys to get the gloves, so he destroyed all the research data Gloves' research. And those people who wanted to take the gloves, but those people who wanted to take the gloves technology gloves, they were all technology gloves. They're he technology gloves, he technology. Later, the Zeus Technology Gloves fell into my hands. Those people targeted me several times, but they were all resolved by me. Over the years, those people didn't do anything. I thought they had given up. I didn't expect something like this to happen again yesterday. After hearing Hua Wuying's explanation of the origin of the Zeus Technology Gloves, Qin Xuan realized that there were so many stories surrounding the Zeus Technology Gloves. I heard that the rules in the Air Center are very strict. Anyone who causes trouble will not have a good ending. Qin Xuan frowned and said, "Is there no one who cares about such a big thing as the Institute being attacked?" Hua Wuying sneered. "The rules are made by those people. Don't you think it's ridiculous that you want to use the rules to restrain them?" Qin Xuan frowned and said, "Then do you know who did these things?" Hua Wuying nodded, then shook her head and replied, "Doing such things in the Air Center and still getting away with it after decades. There are only a few people who have the ability to do so. Maybe it's one of them, or maybe all of them are involved." Hearing Hua Wuying's answer, Qin Xuan couldn't help but have a headache. On the first day he came to the Air Center, he was targeted by Su Mo because he offended Shangwan Yuanhao. Then, he was locked up in the prison of the Supervision Department for 3 years. It wasn't easy for him to get out of prison, But on the second day, he inadvertently became a thorn in the eyes of many big figures in the air center. How could he be so unlucky? You're quite unlucky. Hua Wuying looked at Qin Chuan with a slightly subtle gaze. Strictly speaking, this should be your second day in the air center, but what you experienced is much more exciting than the others. Is it? Qin Chuan smiled bitterly. I think it's quite exciting too. Don't worry, I won't let anything happen to you. Hua Wuying patted Qin Chuan's shoulder. At least, I won't let anything happen to you before the mastermind behind this is out. Hearing Hua Wuying's promise, Qin Chuan didn't know whether he should be happy or cry. Looking at Hua Wuying's expressionless face, he couldn't help but ask, Sister, this Zeus technology glove must be very important to you. Aren't you afraid that I'll lose it? Hua Wuying looked deeply at Qin Chuan. Sometimes I wish I could lose this glove. Then, when this glove is mass-produced, I'll know exactly who killed my father. Qin Chuan pursed his lips and said to Hua Wuying, Actually, sometimes not knowing is a good thing. Hua Wuying was a little puzzled and asked, Why do you say that? Qin Chuan grinned. I know who killed my father, but I can't kill him now, and he can easily kill me. The reason why I was locked up in the 7th prison for 3 years is because of him. This feeling of powerlessness is really despairing. Hearing Qin Chuan's words, Hua Wuying raised her eyebrows slightly and asked, Your father's murderer is Shangguan Yuanhao, right? Qin Chuan nodded and replied, That's him. Shangguan Yuanhao is a Kunlun heir in the middle of the Kunlun heirs. At the same time, he's also a member of the lower house. His position in the center of the Kunlun heirs is not particularly high, but it's not bad either. If you want to take revenge on him here, with your current strength, it's indeed impossible. Hua Wuying said lightly, But I can help you. Qin Chuan heard this and looked at Hua Wuying with a subtle gaze. He asked, What's the condition? Cooperate with me and help me find that person. Then, I'll help you take revenge. Hua Wuying looked at Qin Chuan. A fair and reasonable deal. What do you think? Qin Chuan reached out his hand to Hua Wuying. Happy working with you. Hua Wuying chuckled and reached out to shake Qin Chuan's hand. Happy working with you. Chapter 709. The efficiency of the supervision office was extremely high. In just 2 days, the ruins were cleaned up and restored to its original state. Everything looked brand new, and there were no traces of the battle. In these 2 days, other than cultivating and resting, Qin Chuan followed Hua Wuying around the supervision office to check on the situation. This also allowed Qin Chuan to have a general understanding of the situation in the supervision office. The supervision office had a total of 4 departments, which are the garrison, field, logistics, and guards. The garrison's main duty was to guard the supervision office, prevent prisoners from escaping, and also prevent people from attacking the supervision office. The people who fought against Barbarian Wolf that day were from the garrison. The field team was responsible for patrolling the Kunlun Air Center and arresting criminal suspects. Lu Xing was a member of the field team. The logistics team was responsible for providing logistical services for everyone in the supervision office, including the allocation of combat equipment and cultivation resources. Finally, the guards were Hua Wuying's guards, the most elite team of the supervision office. Every member was in the Golden Core realm, and the captain and vice captain were nascent soul realm cultivators. Qin Chuan was also part of the guards, but he was directly under Hua Wuying's jurisdiction. That day, the reason why Barbaric Wolf had the guts to attack the monitoring department was because Hua Wuying had left the monitoring department with her personal guards and most of the members of the field team. This caused the monitoring department to be empty and gave Barbaric Wolf an opportunity to attack. And the reason why Hua Wuying suddenly took so many people away from the supervision office that day was because of the order of the upper house. And now, Hua Wuying was going to settle the score. Qin Chuan followed behind Hua Wuying and looked at her curiously, asking, What are we going to find trouble with? The upper house. Hua Wuying's answer was simple and straightforward, but made Qin Chuan's heart skip a beat. He was no longer the hothead from before. He was very clear about the position of the upper house in the center of the Kunlun Air Center. Wasn't it too risky for them to find trouble with the upper house? Sister, think about it again. Isn't this too reckless? Qin Chuan suggested. We can target one person first. Hua Wuying glanced at Qin Chuan and asked, "Are you afraid of death?" Qin Chuan nodded honestly. "You're all big shots. Once you start fighting, the aftermath alone could kill me 100 times over." Even now, Qin Chuan could still remember the scene of the battle between Hua Wuying and the barbaric Wolf King. Even if they were separated by 10,000 meters, they would still feel suffocated. If they were too close, they would probably be obliterated by the aftermath of the battle. "Don't worry, there won't be a fight. Even if I flip the table today, they won't make a move." Hua Wuying smiled slightly. "You can rest assured and just cause trouble with me." Qin Chuan asked curiously, "Are you that confident?" "I've been at the center of the airs for so many years. I'm pretty sure I can do that." Hua Wuying glanced at the Zeus technology gloves on Qin Chuan's hands. "Also, I want you to strike first." Qin Chuan was stunned. "Preemptive strike? Me?" As the highest power center of the air center, the upper house was located in the center of the air center. It occupied an entire 1,200-story building. There were nearly 10,000 staff in the building, and all of them only served the members of the upper house. When Hua Wuying and Qin Chuan arrived, it was already 9 o'clock in the morning. According to Qin Chuan's knowledge, Hua Wuying and the other members had an appointment at 8 o'clock in the morning. In other words, they were a whole hour late. Qin Chuan looked at the skyscraper in front of him and sighed. "There are only a dozen members of the upper house, including the speaker, right? There are actually so many people serving you. It's too extravagant and wasteful." "This is the world of the strong." Hua Wuying looked ahead and said to Qin Chuan, "Be more spirited. Don't embarrass me." Qin Chuan coughed lightly, raised his head and puffed out his chest. He looked very valiant and high-spirited. However, when he saw that the guards at the door were two nascent soul cultivators, Qin Chuan's momentum suddenly disappeared. He couldn't help but click his tongue. "Oh my God, there are actually two nascent soul cultivators as security guards. This is too scary. It's just a facade." Hua Wuying walked forward. The two nascent soul security guards directly let Hua Wuying pass, but they wanted to search Qin Chuan. Qin Chuan originally intended to be searched, but Hua Wuying turned around and gave Qin Chuan a look that said, "You're causing trouble." After receiving Hua Wuiying's signal, Qin Chuan immediately grabbed the nascent soul security guard's hand and said coldly, "What is my identity? Are you worthy of searching my body?" Hearing Qin Chuan's words, the two nascent soul security guards couldn't help but wonder if there was something wrong with their ears. It was the first time they saw such a crazy kid. "Although you are the follower of Counselor Hua, you still have to be searched. This is the rule." For Hua Wuiying's face, the nascent soul security guards patiently explained to Qin Chuan. If it wasn't for Hua Wuiying standing at the side, they would definitely teach Qin Chuan a lesson today. "Who said I am the follower of Counselor Hua?" Qin Chuan coldly snorted and pointed to himself. "Do you know my identity?" Seeing Qin Chuan so arrogant, the nascent soul security guards couldn't help but be stunned. Does this kid have another identity? Seeing the nascent soul security guards in a daze, Qin Chuan raised his hand and pushed the two of them away. "You don't even know my identity, and you dare to search my body?" Although Qin Chuan didn't use much strength, the hand that pushed them was wearing Zeus technology gloves. The two nascent soul security guard were unprepared and were instantly pushed 100 meters away by Qin Chuan. Their faces were full of horror, and they no longer mentioned the search. Qin Chuan slowly walked to Hua Wuiying's side and asked with a smile, "How was my performance?" Hua Wuiying nodded gently. "Not bad. Keep it up. Let's go." After saying that, Hua Wuiying walked inside. Qin Chuan followed closely behind. Along the way, they met a lot of people. They all stopped at a distance and bowed to greet Hua Wuiying. Their performance could be said to be extremely respectful. In terms of etiquette, no one could find any fault. In this way, Qin Chuan and Hua Wuiying went all the way to the top floor of the building without any hindrance. They stood in front of the door of the Parliament Hall that countless people yearned for. According to the rules, Qin Chuan was absolutely not qualified to enter the Parliament Hall in front of him. However, Hua Wuiying brought Qin Chuan here. Even with Hua Wuiying's protection, Qin Chuan couldn't help but feel a little uneasy in his heart. No matter how big Qinchuan's courage was, it was impossible for him to face the center of the Kunlun field so calmly, or even the strongest person in their entire world. As if seeing Qinchuan's uneasiness, Hua Wuying said lightly, "They broke the rules first. I'm just returning the favor." Chapter 710. Buzz. The door of the meeting hall slowly opened. The place that symbolized the center of the Kunlun realm and even the highest authority of the entire world unveiled its mysterious veil to Qinchuan. To Qinchuan's surprise, the meeting hall was not big. In fact, it was a little small. It was only about 100 square meters. The number of people sitting at the round table was less than what Qinchuan had expected. There were only 8 people. Including Hua Wuying, there were only 9 people. "Hua Wuying, you're late." A silver-haired middle-aged man wearing a well-tailored suit looked at Qinchuan, who was following behind Hua Wuying. "This is not a place where he can come." Hua Wuying acted as if she did not hear the man's words. She slowly walked to her seat and sat down. Qinchuan followed and stood behind Hua Wuying. Seeing this, the silver-haired middle-aged man snorted and a terrifying pressure enveloped Qinchuan. Hua Wuying waved her hand and dispersed the pressure. She glanced at the silver-haired middle-aged man and said coldly, "What? A few days ago, you allowed me to bring people here. Why can't I bring people here today? What you can do, I can't do. This is different." The silver-haired middle-aged man shook his head and said, "We asked you to bring people here. We didn't ask you to bring them here." "Cut the crap, Sha Zhao," Hua Wuying said in a deep voice. "If you can't give me a satisfactory explanation today, don't blame me for being ruthless." "Hua Wuying, you're too presumptuous." The old man wearing a pair of gold-framed glasses looked at Hua Wuying indifferently. "We can give you an explanation, but let him leave first." Before Hua Wuying could say anything, Qinchuan sneered. "What? Is there something you can't say in front of me? Don't tell me you want to do some shady business." Qinchuan's sudden words caused the atmosphere in the meeting hall to freeze. The temperature instantly dropped to freezing point. These people were already used to being high and mighty and looking down on everyone. It had been a long time since someone dared to speak to them with such a tone, especially when this person was just an ant at the golden core stage. Audacious. Boom. An earth-shattering pressure suddenly descended on Qinchuan's head, as if it wanted to crush Qinchuan into powder. Qinchuan, who was already prepared, did not hesitate to raise his hand and activate the power of the Zeus technology glove. An extremely terrifying power poured out and resisted the pressure. Everyone was shocked to see Qinchuan's performance. Zeus gloves. Looking at the silver-white glove on Qinchuan's hand that had removed its invisibility state, someone exclaimed in a low voice, his face full of disbelief. Their pressure was enough to easily crush an early-stage nascent soul cultivator. However, Qinchuan, a mere middle-stage gold core cultivator, was able to resist their pressure with the help of the Zeus technology gloves. This made them once again witness the power of the Zeus technology gloves. "Enough!" The middle-aged man in a black robe, sitting at the head of the table, shouted coldly. "All of you stop." Hearing this person's words, Qinchuan was the first to stop. The old man on the other side also withdrew his pressure, but his face was extremely gloomy. He looked at Qinchuan with an extremely unfriendly gaze. When the middle-aged man saw that the meeting hall had regained its calm, he looked at Qinchuan and said in a flat tone, "Young man, you must know your place." When Qinchuan heard this, he smiled and replied respectfully, "Thank you for your advice, senior. This junior understands." Qinchuan's attitude towards the middle-aged man was completely different from his attitude towards the others. Long before he came here, Hua Wuying had already shown him the middle-aged man's photo and warned him that he could provoke anyone but this middle-aged man. This middle-aged man was the speaker of the upper house, named Tian Yuan. Tian Yuan looked at Hua Wuying and asked, "You called us here today. What do you want to say? Say it now." Hua Wuying looked around and said to Tian Yuan, "You all should know that the monitoring department was attacked by star beasts a few days ago. I just left with my people, and the monitoring department was attacked. Those star beasts also wanted to destroy the teleportation door that connects the monitoring department to the Kunlun Air Center and prevent me from supporting them. I want to know who is behind this. Star beast attacks are not uncommon. There is no one behind this. The young man in sportswear chuckled and said to Hua Wuying, "If you are unhappy, you can go and fight with the barbaric Wolf King. Why bother us? But what if someone sneaked into my office that day and wanted to take something from my office?" Hua Wuying looked at the young man deeply. "Su Baijiang, don't you find it strange that the person you placed in my monitoring department is missing?" Being called out by Hua Wuying, Su Baijiang's expression changed slightly. He said coldly, "I don't know what you were talking about. The person you arranged, the logistics department member called Chung Mian, deliberately cut off the energy supply of the logistics department and wanted to sneak into my office. In the end, she was caught. She is now in prison. Do you want me to bring her here to confront you?" "I don't know anyone called Chung Mian." Su Baijiang insisted that he didn't know anyone called Chung Mian. He knew very well that Hua Wuying was just bluffing him. He was not afraid of confronting her face to face. As long as he didn't admit it, no one could do anything to him. After living for hundreds of years, he still had this bit of psychological quality. Hua Wuying saw that Su Baijiang refused to admit it, but she was not surprised. She then looked at the old man sitting at the side and asked, "Qian Yuan, do you still need me to say the name of the person you placed in my garrison? Tell me." Qian Yuan said faintly, "I also want to know the name of the person I placed in your monitoring department, and what are you going to send him to do?" Hua Wuying sneered when she heard this. She looked around and said in a deep voice, "So, you don't plan to admit it? Then I want to ask you, why did you suddenly ask me to bring the elite troops of the monitoring department here that day? It can't be a drill, right?" "Hua Wuying, you misunderstood us." Kong Ming, who had been silent all this time, laughed and said to Hua Wuying, "We asked you to come here that day for a great opportunity." "Opportunity?" Hua Wuying sneered. "What kind of opportunity requires all the elites of my monitoring department to be transferred? Not only your monitoring department, all the elites under us will also be transferred." Kong Ming looked deeply at Hua Wuying and said, "We found a new universe relic. Since when does the exploration of a universe relic require all of us to take action?" Hua Wuying continued to sneer. "This reason is too lame." Kong Ming chuckled and asked, "But what if this universe relic is related to the sword god Su Inha?" Chapter 711. Sword God Su Inha. Hearing this name, Hua Wuying couldn't help but slightly squint her eyes and asked, "You found the space ruin that sword god Su Inha went to before he fell?" Kong Ming nodded with a smile and said to Hua Wuying, "We can't be sure at the moment. After the temporary portal is built, we will send people to explore it. For the sake of fairness, each of us can send a team. That's why we asked you to bring the elites of the supervision department here that day. We want to see the strength of the supervision department." Kong Ming's explanation was reasonable, and it was difficult to find any fault with it. However, Hua Wuying knew that these people really wanted to explore the space ruin with her. They also wanted to attack the monitoring department. "So, I've wronged you?" Hua Wuying sneered in her heart, but her face remained calm, as if she really suspected that she had wronged these people. "Of course." Kong Ming smiled. "We are a community of interests. How could we do such a thing that harms others without benefiting ourselves? But how did you find a space ruin? And how did you determine that it was related to sword god Su Inha?" At this time, the new space ruin had become the center of the topic. Hua Wuying naturally had to ask the questions in her heart. "This space ruin was discovered by Xing He's people. Why don't we let Xing He tell you about it?" Kong Ming looked at the short and fat middle-aged man who was sitting silently and seemed to be snoring. "Xing He, wake up. And the meeting is over. Do you want to have lunch?" The sleepy Xing He raised his eyes and looked at everyone present, then yawned loudly. From his appearance and behavior, Xing He didn't look like a late Yuanying stage cultivator at all. However, those who knew Xing He knew very well that Xing He was a person who looked simple and honest, but was actually very insidious and cunning. In the past, many people were deceived by Xing He's simple and honest appearance. These people had long been accustomed to Xing He's disguise. And Qin Chuan, who had already received the information of these people from Hua Wuying, also knew what kind of person Xing He was. However, seeing Xing He's behavior for the first time, he couldn't help but feel a little strange in his heart. Kongming glanced at Xing He and said lightly, "It's Hua Wuying who has something to ask you." Hua. Hearing Hua Wuying's name, Xing He instantly became spirited. His face revealed a hint of excitement. He looked at Hua Wuying, who was sitting at the side, and shouted, "Goddess, we meet again." Hua Wuying was already used to Xing He's surprise. She frowned at Xing He and asked, "What's going on with sword god Su Yinhe?" Xing He smiled and explained to Hua Wuying, "The matter is very simple. My subordinates discovered a new space relic. Originally, this is not a strange thing, but the investigators detected an extremely strong sword intent in this space relic. After many investigations, they confirmed that this is the space relic that sword god Su Yinhe went to before his death. That sword intent is most likely emitted by the Yinhe sword." Hearing Xing He's explanation, Hua Wuying frowned slightly and asked, "Can I have a look at the report?" Xing He seemed to be prepared. He directly threw a quantum computer in front of Hua Wuying and said to her, "Everything you want to see is here." Hua Wuying did not stand on ceremony and directly opened her photon computer to take a look. When she saw that there were signs of insectoid activity in the space ruin, her face could not help but change slightly. She said to Xing He, "There are insectoids living in that space ruin?" Xing He nodded and replied, "According to our deduction, that space relic should be a battlefield during the period of chaos. There are some Zerg left there and have survived until now. What do you think of the danger level of this space relic?" Hua Wuying looked deeply at Xing He. "Back then, sword god Su Yinhe fell because he entered that space relic. What do you think are the chances of us coming out alive? That's why we sent people to explore that space relic." Xing He looked at Hua Wuying. "The prerequisite for any harvest is to pay a price, isn't that right?" "I understand." Hua Wuying stood up. "About the space relic, you guys can discuss it slowly. When the time comes, just give me a result." After saying this, Hua Wuying lifted her foot and walked outside. Qin Chuan followed closely behind. Everyone sat there and watched Qin Chuan and Hua Wuying leave. After the door of the meeting hall closed, Xing He asked everyone curiously, "What do you guys think of that young man?" Sha Zhao narrowed his eyes and said lightly, "Nothing much." Sitting on the flying shuttle returning to the monitoring department, Qin Chuan finally could not help but ask Hua Wuying curiously, "You guys know sword god Su Yinhe?" Hua Wuying glanced at Qin Chuan and replied, "Sword god Su Yinhe was also a member of the upper house. When he became famous, I was still a little girl." Hearing Hua Wuying's words, Qin Chuan asked again, "Why are you guys so interested in the space relic where sword god Su Yinhe fell?" Hua Wuying did not answer Qin Chuan's question. Instead, she asked, "What do you think is the reason?" Qin Chuan seriously thought for a moment and replied, "It's because of the Milky Way sword that was lost in that space relic." Qin Chuan did not think that these members of the upper house were so eager to explore that space relic to eliminate Zerg. In his opinion, the Milky Way sword that was lost in that space relic was their real goal. Hearing Qin Chuan's answer, Hua Wuying chuckled and nodded. "You're right. If it wasn't for the Milky Way sword, these old things would not be so interested in a newly discovered space relic. By the way, how do you feel today?" Qin Chuan chuckled and replied, "To be honest, before I met those people and heard their names, I was full of reverence for them. I felt that they were all dignified seniors and unfathomable. But after interacting with them and understanding them, I realized that they are just humans. They are greedy and have desires. When they do bad things, they will quibble and refuse to admit it. The difference between them and ordinary people is that they have great power. That's all." Hearing Qin Chuan's words, Hua Wuying chuckled and said to Qin Chuan, "Your perspective on things is very novel and very special. But you're right. Even if they are cultivators, they are still humans and not immortals. And your performance today must have left a deep impression in their hearts, but they are unwilling to admit it. Do you believe it?" Qin Chuan grinned. Of course I believe it. Chapter 712. Back at the monitoring office, Hua Wuying was dealing with some documents while Qin Chuan was sitting on the sofa in a daze. When Hua Wuying saw Qin Chuan's state of daydreaming, she picked up the paper ball on the table and threw it at Qin Chuan's face. She asked, "What are you thinking about?" Qin Chuan looked up at Hua Wuying and said with a smile, "I think my experience is very special. It's different from most people. It's very exciting." Qin Chuan felt that the 3 years he spent in the air center were indeed very exciting. When he first arrived, he met his father's murderer, Shangwan Yuanhao. After that, he was given a lot of trouble during the assessment. In a fit of anger, Shangwan Yuanhao put him in jail for 3 years. After 3 years, when he finally came out, he was attacked by a star beast. Before the time of the star beast attack was confirmed, he had attracted the attention of many important people in the upper house because of the Zeus technology gloves. He had even fought with some important people. Any one of these incidents was enough to become a legend, let alone when they were all gathered together. However, such an exciting life experience also brought great risks to Qin Chuan. Now, he was walking on tightrope. If he fell, what awaited him would be a bottomless abyss. There was absolutely no way he could start all over again. Exciting? This is just the beginning. The real exciting part is still to come. Hua Wuying looked at Qin Chuan. "I was just screening the people for the first exploration of the universe ruins. We still lack a leader. Who do you think is more suitable?" Hearing Hua Wuying's suggestive words, Qin Chuan grinned and said, "I think anyone other than me is suitable." Hua Wuying acted as if she did not hear Qin Chuan's words. She smiled and said, "Since you also think you're more suitable, then you'll be the leader of this exploration team." Qin Chuan's face suddenly showed a touch of helplessness when he heard this. He asked Hua Wuying, "Why me?" Hua Wuying took a deep look at Qin Chuan. After a moment of silence, she asked, "Do you know when is the safest time for you?" Qin Chuan replied almost without hesitation, "I'm the safest when I'm with you." This was Qin Chuan's true thought. If he dared to leave Hua Wuying and appear on the street of the air center by himself, he could guarantee that within a day, his corpse would appear in front of some big shot. After answering Hua Wuying's question, Qin Chuan also realized Hua Wuying's intention. He looked at Hua Wuying strangely and asked, "You want them to attack me in the ruins of the universe? They're not that stupid." Hua Wuying chuckled. "You have the Zeus technology glove. Even nascent soul cultivators would find it difficult to pose a threat to you." Qin Chuan had a thoughtful look on his face when he heard this. After pondering for a moment, he said, "You want to see if they will send people to secretly approach me? You want me to investigate their people? Something like that. I need you to have a clear goal during this exploration of the meaning of the universe. Come back and tell me who is testing you, or who is hostile to you." Hua Wuying looked at Qin Chuan meaningfully. "With your ability, it shouldn't be difficult to do these things." Qin Chuan replied seriously, "This is our deal. I will try my best to help you determine this range." Hua Wuying smiled with satisfaction when she heard Qin Chuan's answer. Then she said to Qin Chuan, "Then I'll tell you a piece of good news for you. Shangwan Yuanhao is now in the world within a world. I will block his information exchange with the outside world. I will let him know about you as late as possible." Hearing Hua Wuying's words, a subtle look appeared on Qin Chuan's face. He asked, "If I didn't agree to your previous request, would you still do this?" Hua Wuying chuckled. "I would tie you up and send you to the world within a world to Shangwan Yuanhao. He can do whatever he wants with you. Fortunately, I made the right choice." Qin Chuan smiled. "I hope our deal will always be pleasant. World within a world. Logistics base." Shangwan Yuanhao stood on top of a tall building. He looked indifferently at the trainee heirs who were doing their daily training in the field below. His gaze was focused on a small group of people. Some of these people came from the Star Dragon Federation, some came from the Demon Realm, and some came from the World Mountain. Although they all came from different places, they all had one thing in common. That was, they all had a close relationship with Qin Chuan. They were Qin Chuan's relatives and friends. Since Qin Chuan was locked up in the monitoring department 3 years ago, Shangwan Yuanhao had never seen Qin Chuan again. He also did not hear any news about Qinchuan. He had lived in the World Air Center for many years and had a deep understanding of the monitoring department style of doing things. According to common sense, Qinchuan should have been crippled after being locked up in the monitoring department. Even if he was alive, he would not be able to make any waves. However, he also received news that Qinchuan was not wearing the devil lock when he was taken away. Because of this, there was a change in what was originally certain. As long as Qinchuan was not wearing the devil lock, Shangwan Yuanhao would not feel at ease even if Qinchuan was locked up in the monitoring department for 100 years. In the past 3 years, Shangwan Yuanhao had been looking for an opportunity to find out if Qinchuan was wearing the devil lock. Unfortunately, his people had not been able to find out the truth until now. Therefore, Qinchuan was like a fishbone stuck in Shangwan Yuanhao's throat for the past 3 years. It made Shangwan Yuanhao very uncomfortable. "Master, are you still thinking about Qinchuan?" Si Tang stood behind Shangwan Yuanhao and looked at him with a strange gaze. To be honest, she did not understand why Shangwan Yuanhao cared so much about an insignificant person like Qinchuan. Shangwan Yuanhao turned around and looked at Si Tang. He said calmly, "Is he not worth paying attention to?" "Master, 3 years have passed. Even if Qinchuan was not wearing the devil lock, it is already fortunate that he was not driven crazy and is still alive in a place like the prison where there are no cultivation resources or environment. I really can't think of any way that he can threaten you." Si Tang was right. The preparatory heirs of Kunlun had been working hard to cultivate for the past 3 years. They had already advanced from the later stages of the foundation establishment stage, or the early stages of the golden core stage, to the middle stages of the golden core stage, or even the complete golden core stage. On the other hand, Qinchuan had been locked up in the prison for 3 years. It was already fortunate that he was still alive. Shangwan Yuanhao did not reply to Si Tang. Instead, he extended his hand towards her. He wanted to see the information from the outside world. Only real-time information could temporarily make him feel at ease. Chapter 713. The Senate had always been very efficient. They had already made all the necessary arrangements on the second day after the meeting. Because it was related to the sword god, Su Inha, their operation this time was called the Sword God Operation, and the ruins of the universe were also named the Sword God Ruins. At 9:30 in the morning, Qinchuan led the advanced team of the Supervision Department to the Senate. At this time, the advanced teams of the other forces had already gathered here, and everyone was waiting for their arrival. The arrival of Qinchuan and the others attracted the attention of everyone present. To be precise, it should be Qinchuan who attracted everyone's attention because the silver-white metal gloves on Qinchuan's hands were too eye-catching and difficult to ignore. Although the incident that happened a few days ago in the Senate Hall was not spread out, the members of the Senate would definitely warn their own forces to be careful of Qinchuan, who had the Zeus technology gloves. If it was not necessary, they should try their best not to have any conflicts with Qinchuan. Qinchuan did not care about the vigilant and alert gazes of the crowd. He came here to carry out a mission, not to make friends with these people. As long as these people did not affect his mission, it did not matter what kind of gazes they used to look at him. Seeing Qinchuan's arrival, a middle-aged man in the Senate uniform stood in the middle and shouted, "Everyone gather!" Hearing this person shout, everyone present gathered and automatically stood in a row. The middle-aged man looked at the crowd in front of him and said in a serious tone, "My name is Shun Feng, the person in charge of your operation this time. I have a few words to make clear to you here. I hope you will listen carefully and remember them in your minds. First, the exploration of the Sword God ruins this time will be very dangerous. I'm sure you've already understood this before coming here. However, you will also receive a generous reward. After this operation is over, not only will you receive a reward from the Senate, but everything you obtain in the Sword God ruins will also belong to you. The higher-ups will not ask for anything from you. Second, during the operation, you must listen to my instructions. If anyone acts without permission and causes the team to encounter danger, I will directly abandon you in the ruins. you can forget about coming back in this lifetime. Third, which is also the most important point, internal strife is prohibited within the team. If you have any disputes, you can settle them outside. Once we reach the Sword God's ruins, if you want to cause any internal strife, I will directly deal with you. That's all I have to say. If you have any questions, you can ask them now. As soon as Shun Feng finished speaking, no one raised any objections. Long before they came here, they had already been repeatedly instructed that everything should be focused on exploring the Sword God's ruins, and it was best not to do other unrelated things. Since no one has any objections, follow me. Qin Chuan looked around at everyone, then turned around and walked toward the hall behind him. Everyone followed closely behind him. At this moment, Lu Xing, who was walking behind Qin Chuan, began to introduce the various forces to him in a low voice. This time, there are a total of 100 people in the advance party. Apart from the chairman, who has 20 people participating, the rest of the families have 10 people. The one who spoke to us just now, Shun Feng, is the chairman's trusted aide. He's an early-stage nascent soul cultivator, and he's the only nascent soul cultivator in the advance party. Hearing Lu Xing's words, Qin Chuan asked in confusion, "Why is there only one nascent soul cultivator? Why not send a few more?" Hearing this, Lu Xing looked at Qin Chuan with a subtle gaze and said in a low voice, "Our mission this time is to explore the Sword God's ruins and collect information for the next large-scale invasion of the Sword God's ruins. Strength is secondary, and once we encounter danger, not many of us will be able to return alive." Qin Chuan gently raised his eyebrows and said in a low voice, "You mean to say that the people above feel that there is a high probability that the advance party will die in the Sword God's ruins, so they let us Aura's core stage cultivators come? Even if we all die, they won't feel bad?" Lu Xing nodded with a bitter smile and replied, "That's roughly what I mean. Of course, the premise is that we have to send back the information, otherwise they will still feel bad." Then Shun Feng, the only nascent soul cultivator, is probably used to break out of the encirclement with information when we encounter danger. Qin Chuan chuckled. These people are quite thoughtful. Lu Xing sighed and said to Qin Chuan, "This is the reality. People like us who don't have strength can only accept our fate. But fortunately, we have you. With the Zeus technology gloves in your hands, we shouldn't be in too much danger." Qin Chuan heard this and nodded lightly, then said to Lu Xing, "When the time comes, just follow me closely." Just as the two of them were talking, Shun Feng had already led everyone to an underground secret room. In the middle of the secret room, there was a huge teleportation gate, but this teleportation gate was somewhat different from the teleportation gates that Qin Chuan had seen in the past. The spatial fluctuations it emitted were extremely unstable. This is the temporary teleportation gate that connects to the Sword God's ruins. Although it is not particularly stable, the probability of a problem is not high. After passing through this teleportation gate, we will appear near a cave. That is the only safe place we can confirm in the Sword God's ruins. After landing, it is best for you to immediately gather at the cave. Staying outside for a long time will only harm others and yourself. Do you understand? Understood. Everyone responded loudly. Seeing this, Shun Feng said to everyone, "Then let's go." Shun Feng took the lead and walked into the teleportation gate. The others followed one after another. Qin Chuan walked into the teleportation gate in the middle of the crowd, accompanied by a sense of weightlessness and a slight tearing feeling. In the next moment, Qin Chuan's figure appeared on a slightly desolate pitch-black mountaintop. The moment Qin Chuan landed, he immediately squatted down and looked around vigilantly. After discovering that there was no danger, he jumped down from the mountaintop and walked into the cave located halfway up the mountain. At this time, there were already many people in the cave. The 10 people from the supervision department had all arrived. Shun Feng stood in the middle of the crowd and frowned. It's already been 2 minutes. There are still 4 people who haven't arrived. When everyone heard Shun Feng's words, their expressions became somewhat subtle. After they landed, they didn't hear any sounds of battle. In other words, it was very likely that an accident had occurred during the teleportation process. A 4% probability? Qinchuan muttered in a low voice. The probability of an accident wasn't high, and it didn't happen to the people from the supervision department. Qinchuan didn't particularly care. However, because of the unexpected disappearance of these 4 people, their morale had suffered a certain blow. This would probably have a certain impact on their future actions. Now, it was up to Shun Feng, the leader, to adjust everyone's mood. Chapter 714. Sir, among the 4 missing people, 2 of them are from our speaker's team. The other 2 are the subordinates of Councilman Kong Ming and Councilman Baijiang. Hearing his subordinates report, Shun Feng replied, "Record the names of the missing people. When we return, we will distribute the compensation according to the highest standard." After settling this matter simply, Shun Feng turned his gaze to everyone and said in a clear voice, "Now, everyone will form a small team and explore in all directions with this mountain as the center. During the exploration process, try to be as careful as possible. Once you discover any problem, report it immediately." With Shun Feng's order, everyone started to move. Each of them chose a direction to explore. Qin Chuan led everyone from the supervision department to choose the northwest direction to explore. Everyone, try not to land on the ground during the exploration process. Don't come into contact with anything. If you discover anything, report it to me immediately. If you discover a treasure, it will belong to the first person to report it to me. Before starting the exploration, Qin Chuan decided to hold a small internal meeting first to prevent anyone from doing anything bad. Everyone naturally didn't have any objections to Qin Chuan's arrangement. Very quickly, they started to act according to Qin Chuan's instructions. The 10 of them gathered in a group and slowly moved forward with clear division of labor. They didn't discover anything even after moving forward for nearly 5 kilometers. It was inevitable that their mood would become impetuous. Fortunately, Qin Chuan kept comforting everyone's mood, so there weren't too many problems. Just at this moment, someone made a special discovery. "Captain, there seems to be a dead man's flower over there." Hearing this slightly excited voice, everyone subconsciously looked at the person who spoke and pointed to a crack in a rock. A black flower with 6 leaves was gently swaying, emitting a rotten aura. The dead man's flower was a kind of elixir that grew by absorbing the essence of human flesh and blood, as well as evil aura. Therefore, the dead man's flower basically only appeared on the battlefield and rarely grew in other places. Therefore, the dead man's flower could be said to be an extremely rare treasure in the outside world. It could be said to be priceless. A 6-leaf dead man's flower, at least 600 years old. The eyes of the person who first discovered the dead man flower lit up. In the outside world, dead man flowers that were over 100 years old were extremely rare, let alone 600 years old. If this stock were to be sold outside, it could be exchanged for at least 1,000 third-grade starstones. Qin Chuan glanced at the death flower and chuckled. The death flower has the effect of tempering the human body. The older it is, the better the tempering effect. This death flower is indeed a treasure. "Wang Ming, you go pick it yourself. The others will be on guard." After hearing Qin Chuan's words, Wang Ming, who had already been a little impatient, immediately rushed toward the dead man flowers 100 meters away. He couldn't help the excitement on his face, as if he could already see himself sitting in a pile of star stones. I'm rich. 100 meters could be covered in the blink of an eye for a golden core cultivator like Wang Ming. Just as he crouched down in front of the rock and was about to pluck the dead man's flower, a pair of extremely sinister eyes suddenly appeared on the black rock. Qin Chuan, who had been paying attention to Wang Ming's situation, was the first to notice the change in the rock. His face immediately changed, and he shouted at Wang Ming, "Wang Ming, fall back, there's danger." Wang Ming, who was about to pluck the dead man's flower, couldn't help being a little blank when he heard Qin Chuan shout. Looking at the dead man's flower so close in front of him, he couldn't help hesitating. He wanted to pluck the dead man's flower before retreating, but it was this moment of hesitation that cost him his only chance of survival. Buzz! A pair of huge, sharp insect legs cut through the air and ruthlessly pierced Wang Ming's body at lightning speed, causing blood to splatter everywhere. What kind of rock was that black rock? It was clearly Zerg in disguise. Wang Ming's outstretched hand finally stopped less than a centimeter away from the dead man's flower. The greed and hesitation in his eyes had now completely turned into regret. He didn't want to die. He really didn't want to die. Whoosh! A white figure abruptly appeared behind Zerg, and the cross-wavy blade in its hand stabbed at Zerg's head with extreme precision. Although Zerg's hard shell could block the cross-wavy blade's attack, it couldn't block the moonlight slash that followed. Poochie! Before Zerg could turn around to see who on earth had attacked it, its head had already flown off and fallen to the ground. Black blood gushed out of the wound and dyed Wang Ming's body pitch black. After killing Zerg, Qin Xuan quickly landed on the ground to treat Wang Ming, but when he saw Wang Ming's condition, his outstretched hand froze. Wang Ming was already dead. At that moment, the rest of the people from the supervision office had already arrived. Looking at the decapitated Zerg and the lifeless Wang Ming, their expressions were extremely complicated. Qin Xuan had clearly warned Wang Ming to retreat if there was danger, but Wang Ming hadn't listened. It could only be said that Wang Ming's greed had killed him. Wang Ming died near the dead man's flower, so it should have already absorbed his soul. Lu Xing sighed. If it wasn't for the dead man's flower, maybe we could still take his soul back and turn him into a ghost cultivator. It's my fault. I shouldn't have let him come here alone to pick the flower. We should have come together. Qin Xuan blamed himself a little. If I had been more careful, this wouldn't have happened. It's not your fault, Captain. Someone comforted Qin Xuan. You already warned Wang Ming. With his reflexes, he definitely could have pulled away in time. Hearing this, everyone nodded slightly. In their view, Qin Xuan hadn't done anything wrong. The ones at fault were Wang Ming and this sinister Zerg. Qin Xuan looked around and said to someone in the team, Li Ku, go back the way you came and tell Shen Feng what happened to us. Tell him to inform the other teams to be careful of Zerg's trap. We'll continue on our original route, so you don't have to go back. Yes. After receiving Qin Xuan's order, Li Ku immediately turned around and went back the way he came, while the others continued forward. What should we do with this dead man's flower? Lu Xing glanced at the dead man's flower that was still swaying in the wind and said to Qin Xuan, pick it or destroy it. Qin Xuan pursed his lips and said in a low voice, I remember that Wang Ming has a sister in the air center. Let's pick this flower and give it to her when we get out. When everyone heard Qin Xuan's decision, they weren't surprised and didn't think there was anything wrong with it. They even thought more highly of Qin Xuan because of it. If they had recognized Qin Xuan as their captain at first because of Hua Wuying's orders, now they recognized Qin Xuan from the bottom of their hearts. Chapter 7:15. Inside the cave, Shen Feng watched as Li Ku left with his report. He then turned his gaze to the handsome young man sitting next to him and asked, What do you think? The handsome young man said faintly, The monitoring department is the first of all the teams to report back. This news is very important to our advance team. If we can inform the other teams in time, we might be able to reduce a lot of casualties. Shen Feng shook his head and said, I'm not asking about this, but Qin Xuan is a person. What do you think of Qin Xuan? The handsome young man was slightly startled by Shen Feng's question. After pondering for a moment, he replied, He's a pretty good guy. Just pretty good? Shen Feng smiled when he heard this. Believe it or not, more than one team has encountered such a situation. However, Qin Xuan might be the only one who will send someone back to report. I don't believe it. The handsome young man looked at Shen Feng. In a place like this, we still have to stick together for warmth. They are all smart people. They wouldn't do something that harms others without benefiting themselves. It's because they are smart people that they would do something like this. Shen Feng sneered. Cleverness leads to the downfall of cleverness. That's exactly what this kind of person is. The handsome young man frowned slightly, but didn't say anything else. There was no point in arguing about this now. Everything would naturally be answered later. The exploration distance of 10,000 meters wasn't considered long. Even the slowest team finished exploring after 2 hours and returned to the cave. It was just that the teams that had set out had almost all suffered losses when they returned. The team with the most casualties actually had 4 people dead, while Qinchuan's team had the least casualties. Only Wang Ming had been sacrificed. "Tell me, what did you encounter?" Shenfeng looked at everyone and said in a low voice, "Why did so many people die?" "We encountered danger during the exploration," someone answered. "Later, we were reminded to be more careful, so there were no more casualties." Most of the other people's answers were the same. No one gave a clear explanation as to why there had been casualties. Looking at the calm and indifferent expressions on these people's faces, Shunfeng's face couldn't help but turn completely gloomy. "Before we set off, I told you to report any situation you encountered. Since you encountered danger and sacrifice yourselves, why didn't you report it?" Facing Shunfeng's question, everyone turned silent. No one answered Shunfeng's question. Seeing this scene, Shunfeng sneered and said to everyone, "You all have quite a tacit understanding in this aspect. Are you all thinking that if you all encounter danger and lose people, you will also cause the other teams to lose people?" Shunfeng's words mercilessly pierced through the little thoughts in everyone's hearts, causing their expressions to change slightly as they began to feel somewhat uncomfortable. "Before we set off, I warned you that you can fight however you want outside, but in the Sword God ruins, internal strife is strictly prohibited. Although you don't have any internal strife, what's the difference between internal strife and internal strife? Would you be happy if we were wiped out because of a lack of manpower when we encounter danger? This is only the first time, so I'll let you off for now. However, if any of you dare to play such tricks on me again, then don't blame me for being merciless." After everyone left the cave and went outside to rest, Shunfeng sighed and said to the handsome young man beside him, "Do you believe me now? These people are selfish. Do they even put our common interests in their eyes?" If it wasn't for Shunfeng stopping her, she would have already lost her temper at these people. This was simply too outrageous. "Tianmei, you must remember that if you encounter danger in the future, you must follow Qinchuan closely. Only Qinchuan can protect you." Shenfeng looked at Tianmei seriously. "Don't try to be brave when you encounter something. You must first protect yourself." Hearing Shunfeng's words, Tianmei's expression changed slightly and asked, "Uncle Shun, do you think we will encounter danger?" At the beginning, I wasn't sure. However, after seeing the performance of these people, I don't think that our journey will be smooth sailing. Shunfeng sighed and said, "A person's selfishness is the most difficult to control. I can only do my best." Hearing this, Tianmei clenched her teeth and said, "At that time, if we encounter danger, I will reveal my identity. I don't believe that they will dare to disobey." "Absolutely not." Shunfeng's expression suddenly changed. His tone was extremely serious as he said to Tianmei, "You must not let them know your identity." Tianmei frowned and said, "What? Could it be that they dare to harm me?" If it was outside, these people naturally wouldn't dare to act recklessly. However, in here, if they are in a desperate situation, these people may do something. Shenfeng said to Tianmei very seriously, "Here, your identity will only become a burden to you." In the face of Shunfeng's warning, Tianmei felt that Shunfeng was exaggerating. However, thinking of what happened before, she couldn't help but frown. If you encounter a situation where you have to reveal your identity, then tell Qinchuan. Compared to others, Qinchuan is the most reliable. Shenfeng said to Tianmei earnestly, "You sneaked out this time. If I can't bring you back safely, I won't have the face to face the speaker." "I know, Uncle Shun," Tianmei promised. "I will do as you say." Outside the cave, Qinchuan sat on a rock, looking at the gloomy sky and earth in the distance. He was not in a good mood. Originally, he thought that this operation was just a simple exploration. At most, he would be able to complete the mission assigned to him by Hua Wuying. As long as he did not encounter Zerg's main force, there should not be any big problems. However, after seeing the performance of those people, he suddenly felt that the most dangerous person might not be Zerg, but his so-called companions. Lu Xing slowly walked to Qin Chuan's side and sat down. He said to Qin Chuan, "The director asked me to give this to you." Qin Chuan looked at the envelope that Lu Xing handed over. He was slightly stunned and asked, "What is this?" "I'm not sure. The director once told me that if our team encounters a crisis of trust, I am to give this to you." Lu Xing looked at Qin Chuan. "I think now is the time." Qin Chuan heard this and reached out to take the envelope. He opened it and took out a card. There is only one word written on the card in blood red: "Kill." Seeing the word "kill" written on the card, Qin Chuan instantly understood what Hua Wuying meant. He sighed helplessly and said in a low voice, "So you already expected this to happen. If possible, I really don't want to do this." Chapter 716. Everyone gather. Following Shun Feng's command, the people who were scattered all over the place immediately gathered together. Shen Feng stood at the entrance of the cave, looking at everyone in front of him, and said in a deep voice, "After analyzing the information obtained from the previous exploration, I have decided to set off towards the east. Everyone, do not fall behind, and do not act on your own. If you discover anything, report it immediately. Again, any treasure you discover belongs to you, and no one will snatch your opportunity. However, if you harm the entire team because of your greed, I will definitely not let you off." Hearing Shun Feng's words, everyone's expression turned serious. Previously, when they were far away from Shun Feng, they could still make some small moves. However, now that they were under Shun Feng's nose, once they were caught, they would definitely be punished as a typical example. It was better to restrain themselves. Qin Chuan looked at Shun Feng and suddenly frowned as he turned his gaze to Tian Mei, who was standing beside Shen Feng. Their gazes met in the air, and Tian Mei did not avoid it. Instead, she smiled at Qin Chuan and gently nodded. Qin Chuan gently nodded in response, and then quietly asked Lu Xing, who was beside him, "Who is the person standing beside Shen Feng? I don't recognize him." Lu Xing shook his head. "This is the first time I saw him. He is quite pretty, but unfortunately, he is a boy." Hearing Lu Xing's reply, Qin Chuan was somewhat speechless. "A boy? Why do you care if he's pretty or not? Don't tell me you want to go up to him? Now, everyone listen to my orders. Set off." After Shen Feng gave the order, everyone immediately moved. The chairman's side was the vanguard. Xinghe and Kongming's side were the left wing, Shachi and Baizhang's side were the right wing, and the monitoring department side was at the rear, while the rest were in the middle. With regards to Shun Feng's arrangement, no one had any objections. Qin Chuan was also happy to bring people to bring up the rear. After all, they were the most familiar with the situation at the rear. Basically, there would not be any problems at the rear, and it could be said that it was the most comfortable place besides the middle. Although there should not be any problems with us bringing up the rear, everyone still needs to be careful. Qin Chuan said to everyone, "I will divide you into 2 teams. Each team has 4 people, and you will take turns to be on guard. I will be on guard with each team. If there are any problems or discoveries, report to me immediately." When everyone heard Qin Chuan's words, they hesitated and said, "Captain, if you're on duty with us, you won't have time to rest. Wouldn't that be too tiring?" "You don't have to worry about me. I know what I'm doing." Qin Chuan smiled. "Just do as I say." In the depths of the Sword God ruins, a towering mountain rose steeply from the ground and pierced through the clouds. This towering mountain was covered with densely packed impulses, and within each of these impulses was a completely black, ferocious beetle resting. It looked exceptionally strange and extremely sinister. A black beetle the size of a fist flew over from afar and rushed straight into a wormhole, handing over the latest information to its superior. "How many years has it been? Have humans appeared again?" A sinister voice came from the dark cave, revealing an astonishing killing intent. "His Highness is now in a critical period of recovery. He must not be disturbed by anyone. Kill those intruders." As the voice fell, an evil gaze passed through the dark cave and looked at the silver-white, long sword inserted into the ground in the distance. A strong sense of fear flashed through the eyes of the evil gaze. The Sword God Ruins was more desolate than everyone imagined. Along the way, they found almost nothing. They did not even see Zerg's figure. This place is too desolate. Lu Xing looked at the dark brown ground under his feet and said to Qin Chuan, "Originally, everyone thought that this was a fat job, but who would have thought that there was not even a little bit of profit to be had?" Lu Xing's words could be said to have touched the bottom of everyone's heart. The reason why they were chosen to join the advance party was firstly because Hua Wuying named them, and secondly because the first group of people who explored new cosmic ruins in the past always had a lot to eat. They originally thought that this time would be the same, but they did not expect to encounter such a barren place. Qin Chuan heard this and laughed. He said to Lu Xing, "You don't think that this trip is a good thing, do you?" While talking, Qin Chuan suddenly noticed that the team in front of them had stopped. He sent someone to inquire about the situation. The news he received was that the team had temporarily stopped moving forward and was resting on the spot. Qin Chuan did not feel that this arrangement was inappropriate, so he ordered everyone to rest on the spot. However, he still divided a small team to be on guard while the others rested on the spot. Qin Chuan had just sat down on the ground when a figure slowly walked over from not far away and stood in front of Qin Chuan. Qin Chuan looked at the handsome young man in front of him and asked curiously, "What's the matter? Let's get to know each other. My name is Tian Mei." Tian Mei looked at Qin Chuan and reached out a white and delicate hand to Qin Chuan. Qin Chuan was stunned for a moment, then reached out and shook hands with Tian Mei. When he touched that soft hand, Qin Chuan instantly realized that the person in front of him was not a man, but a woman disguised as a man. After shaking hands, Tian Mei sat down beside Qin Chuan and asked Qin Chuan, "Do you know why the monitoring department was arranged to bring up the rear?" Qin Chuan shook his head and said, "I don't know. I just need to do my job well." Hearing Qin Chuan's words, Tian Mei smiled and said to Qin Chuan, "Do you know my identity?" Qin Chuan thought for a moment and nodded gently. "I can roughly guess. Do you know? Because you sent someone back to report about the dead flower. Uncle Shun thinks you're a reliable person, so he arranged for the monitoring department to bring up the rear. If you encounter an irresistible danger later, the monitoring department will immediately change from the rear to the vanguard and retreat as quickly as possible." Hearing Tian Mei's words, Qin Chuan looked at Tian Mei with a subtle gaze and said, "So you know how to leave here and return to the center of the Kunlun field, and our mission is to escort you out safely, right?" Tian Mei looked at Qin Chuan with some surprise and then nodded with a smile. "You're right. That's indeed the case." Qin Chuan let out a long breath and asked, "What does Shen Feng know? Why do we have to prepare to retreat less than a day after we entered here?" "He only knows that we are not of one mind." Tian Mei looked deeply at Qin Chuan. "How can we achieve great things if we are not of one mind?" "I understand. Thank you for being honest with me." Qin Chuan looked at Tian Mei. "I will protect you." Among the vanguard team, only Shen Feng and Tian Mei knew how to leave the Sword God Ruins and return to the center of the Kunlun field, so Shen Feng and Tian Mei were very important. No matter the reason, he had to protect Tian Mei. Chapter 717. Rumble. Suddenly, the earth quaked and the mountains shook. Everyone who was resting immediately jumped up from the ground and subconsciously rose into the air. The moment everyone rose into the air, countless flying insects gathered from all directions and surrounded everyone in the air. "Oh no, it's Zerg. They found us." Looking at the sky full of flying insects and the giant beetle that drilled out from the ground, everyone's expression suddenly became panicked. "Don't panic. Everyone listen to my orders. Form the round shield formation." Shen Feng roared. Everyone immediately formed the round shield formation and began to fight with Zerg. In the midst of the panic, Qin Chuan found Tian Mei in the crowd and grabbed her wrist. He said in a low voice, "Follow me closely. Don't get lost." Tian Mei subconsciously broke free from Qin Chuan's hand and said to Qin Chuan, "The battle has just begun. We haven't been defeated yet." Qin Chuan heard her and said coldly, "Zerg obviously came prepared. Look at our people. Although they've already formed the formation, how many of them have the will to fight?" Hearing Qin Chuan's words, Tian Mei subconsciously looked at the people around her. Just as Qin Chuan said, everyone's faces were filled with fear and uneasiness. There was not much fighting spirit at all. If Shun Feng had not forcibly organized everyone, these people would have scattered and fled. How could this be? Tian Mei looked at the scene in front of her with disbelief. These people were the elites of the Kunlun Air Center. How could their performance be so bad? You don't really think that these people are elites, do you? Wrong. They're all cannon fodder. Qin Chuan's face was gloomy. These people are just here to make up the numbers. The real elites will only be sent out when they have absolute confidence. Before entering the Sword God's ruins, Qin Chuan also thought that these people were elites. However, when Shun Feng flew into a rage in the cave, Qin Chuan realized that there was a serious mistake in his thinking. The elites would never make such a low-level mistake, let alone be scolded speechless by Shun Feng. And the scene in front of him confirmed his guess. These people were all cannon fodder. Only the monitoring department sent out the real elites. Those old things are all playing tricks. Qin Chuan gritted his teeth, but there was nothing he could do. He discovered this too late. There was no turning back the situation. At this time, Tian Mei still wanted to salvage the situation, but Qin Chuan simply grabbed Tian Mei and said to Tian Mei, "Idiot, don't hesitate here. Follow me." Qin Chuan pulled Tian Mei and gathered everyone in the monitoring department. He said to everyone, follow me. We're thinking of breaking out from the north." Hearing Qin Chuan's words, Li Xing was a little surprised. He asked, "Why are we breaking out from the north? Shouldn't we go back the way we came?" "Zerg is already prepared. If we go back the way we came, we'll be sending sheep to the tiger's den." Qin Chuan shouted and did not explain to the others. He immediately rushed to the north. Everyone immediately followed. And just as Qin Chuan led everyone to break out of the encirclement, the round shield battle formation formed by the majority of the troops suddenly collapsed. All the troops scattered. Only Shun Feng was still leading the chairman's men to hold on. "Bastards, come back! All of you come back!" Seeing the round shield battle formation being broken, Shun Feng roared. However, at this time, no one listened to his orders. Everyone had gone crazy. In order to survive, they would do anything. The 70-man team was defeated by Zerg in the blink of an eye, and then nibbled away. Tian Mei followed behind Qin Chuan. She could not help but look back. Looking at the people fleeing in all directions, she could not help but have a look of panic on her face. She cried out involuntarily. How did they collapse just like that? Even if they're not elites, they're still Golden Core adepts. So what if they're Golden Core adepts? In the face of life and death, they're just ordinary people. Qin Chuan did not even look back. The fate of the people behind him had nothing to do with him. What he needed to do now was to bring Tian Mei and the others back to the Kunlun Field Center. "Tell me the way back. I swear I'll bring you back." Qin Chuan looked at Tian Mei seriously. "We have to leave here as soon as possible." Now, the people behind them were buying time for them. Once Zerg finished off those people, it would be impossible for them to retreat calmly. Tian Mei looked at Qin Chuan resolutely. She gritted her teeth and said, "Uncle Shun is still behind us. I'm taking Uncle Shun with me." "Are you crazy?" Qin Chuan was in disbelief. "Shun Feng asked you to tell me this because he wants to sacrifice himself to buy time for us. If we go back now, not only will we save Shun Feng, but we'll also die." Tian Mei shook her head and said, "I'm not crazy. You choose. Either we go back and save Uncle Shun and leave together, or we all die here." Hearing Tian Mei's words, Qin Chuan was really going crazy. However, there was nothing he could do about Tian Mei. He endured it and persuaded Tian Mei. "We really can't go back." Tian Mei replied straightforwardly, "If that's the case, then we'll all die together." Boom! At this moment, an extremely shocking aura suddenly erupted from behind them. Shun Feng, who was in a desperate situation, had directly released his complete form and burned his own power. With just one attack, Zerg, who was in the sky, had turned into ashes. However, the number of Zerg was too large. They filled up the empty space in a moment, not giving Shun Feng a chance to break out at all. Seeing this, Tian Mei immediately said to Qin Chuan, Uncle Shun has released his complete form. He's at his strongest. You guys hurry up and save him. Qin Xuan glared at Tian Mei, then said to everyone, "You guys take her away. I'll go back and save Uncle Shun." As he said that, Qin Xuan pushed Tian Mei towards Lixing, then rushed towards Zerg's army alone. While he was still on the way, he had already started inscribing 10-directional thunder prison. 10-directional thunder prison, activate. Qin Xuan shouted angrily. A huge formation suddenly appeared in the sky. Then, a thick lightning pillar fell from the sky, directly piercing through Zerg's army. After the lightning pillar pierced through Zerg's army, it suddenly exploded. Countless lightning bolts raged in the sky, sweeping in all directions. Countless Zerg fell in this lightning storm. Shun Feng, who was in the middle of the encirclement, was shocked when he saw this scene. Before he could figure out what was going on, Qin Xuan's voice had already reached his ears. "Hurry up and break out. Come to the north." Hearing Qin Xuan's words, Shun Feng rushed towards the north without hesitation. The rest of the survivors followed closely behind. When Qin Xuan saw that Shun Feng and the rest had broken out of the encirclement, he immediately went back to find the people from the monitoring department. When he met up with everyone, Qin Xuan said to Tian Mei, "Can you tell me how to leave now?" Chapter 718. Hearing Qin Xuan's words, the expression on Tian Mei's face became somewhat complicated. She asked Qin Xuan, "Did you save them because you know the way to leave?" Qin Xuan frowned and asked Tian Mei, "What do you want to say? You obviously have the ability to save them. Why didn't you want to save them in the beginning?" Tian Mei looked at Qin Xuan with disappointment. "Uncle Shun always told me that you were the most reliable person, but you are too selfish. Your performance really disappointed me." Hearing Tian Mei's words, Qin Xuan was really angry and laughed. He looked at Tian Mei and sneered, "Don't you think too highly of yourself? I really don't know who gave you the courage to talk to me like this. Is it the way to leave in your hands? Or is it the Uncle Shun that I just saved?" Hearing Qin Xuan's words, Tian Mei's face immediately became ugly. She glared at Qin Xuan and asked, "What do you mean? Don't you know what I mean?" Qin Xuan looked at Tian Mei with gloomy eyes. "Do you know how big of a risk I took when I went to save them? Because of your stubbornness. Now, our overall plan has been disrupted. Not only are you not grateful to me, but you also speak in a strange tone. Do you really think that I am easy to provoke? You, Tian Mei." At this moment, Shun Feng, who had broken out of the encirclement, came forward and said to everyone in an extremely serious tone, "Let's go." Seeing Shun Feng come over, Tian Mei immediately asked with concern, "Uncle Shun, are you okay?" Facing Tian Mei's concern, Shun Feng asked in a deep voice, "Did you ask Qin Xuan to go back and save me?" Tian Mei immediately nodded and said to Shun Feng, "Yes, I asked him to go save you, Uncle Shun." Before Tian Mei finished speaking, she was interrupted by Shun Feng's confused. He looked at Tian Mei helplessly and said, "Why did you ask Qin Xuan to go back and save me?" While speaking, Shin Feng looked at Qin Xuan and asked puzzledly, "Why are you so obedient?" Qin Xuan sneered and said to Shin Feng, "If I don't go back and save you, she won't tell me the way to leave. She wants everyone to die together. How do you think I should choose?" Hearing Qin Xuan's words, Shun's face slightly changed. Then he said to Tian Mei, "Confused. You are too confused. You are really too confused. How can you make such a mistake in such a life and death moment? Do you want all of us to die?" Tian Mei's face suddenly turned pale when she heard Shun Feng's words. She never thought that Shun Feng would say such a thing to her. She looked at Shun Feng in disbelief and asked, "Uncle Shun, I don't understand. What did I do wrong?" Shun Feng smiled bitterly and explained to Tian Mei, "In my original plan, if we were in danger, Qin Xuan would take you to break out of the encirclement and then return to the center of the Kunlun field. I would stay behind to stall Zerg for you. Even if I died, as long as you could return to the center of the Kunlun field safely, I would be relieved. But now you have to ask Qin Xuan to save me. Not only will it delay our precious escape time, but it will also cause all of us to be targeted by Zerg. Now it will be extremely difficult for us to leave here and return to the center of the Kunlun field easily. After hearing Shan Feng's explanation, Tian Mei's expression was somewhat pained. Why must someone be sacrificed? Qin Xuan couldn't help but say coldly. Why do you have so many questions? If you really think that the world should develop in the way you want it to, then I'll trouble you to think of a way to kill all the Zerg behind us. Okay? Hearing Qin Xuan's words, Tian Mei subconsciously turned her head and looked behind her. She saw that there were a lot of Zerg chasing after them, and their numbers were not less than before. At this moment, Tian Mei finally realized that she might have done something wrong and implicated everyone present, but she did not regret it in her heart. If she could choose again, she would still force Qin Xuan to save Shan Feng. In your eyes, I'm wrong, but in my heart, I'm right. We have different starting points and different pursuits, so naturally, the results we want are different. Tian Mei looked deeply at Qin Xuan. But you're right. I shouldn't have treated you with such an attitude. I should be grateful that you saved Uncle Shan. I apologize for my previous attitude. After hearing Tian Mei's apology, Qin Xuan was too lazy to continue arguing with Tian Mei. He looked at Shen Feng and asked, "Can we leave now?" Shen Feng said to Qin Xuan, "The teleportation gate to leave must be placed on the mountain where we came from. Now we have to go back there." Qin Xuan's expression changed slightly. He said to Shen Feng, "But we're now moving in a different direction. We're getting farther and farther away from the starting point." "I know, so we have to find a way to go back now." Shen Feng looked around and said to Qin Xuan, "Right now, the Zergs are chasing us from behind. We have to get rid of them as soon as possible. Otherwise, we might fall into their encirclement. I can also see that there's something wrong with these Zerg. They don't seem to be chasing after us. Instead, they seem to be driving us in a certain direction." Qin Xuan's expression was a little serious. He said in a deep voice, "Maybe they've already begun to close in on us." As soon as Qin Xuan's voice fell, a buzzing sound suddenly came from in front of them. Countless Zerg suddenly flew up from the dark ground and charged straight at Qin Xuan's group. When they saw this scene, the expressions of everyone became extremely unsightly. They had really entered the Zerg's encirclement. All-directional thunder prison, activate. Qin Xuan let out a low roar, and lightning suddenly descended from the gloomy sky, bombarding the swarm of insects in front of him. In an instant, a large number of insects were blasted to death. However, to the entire swarm of insects, this was just a drop in the ocean. There are too many of these damn Zergs. Qin Xuan frowned and said to everyone, "Use me as the vanguard and break out of the encirclement." At this critical moment, no one would compete with Qin Xuan for leadership. Everyone obediently came behind Qin Xuan and followed closely behind Qin Xuan as they prepared to break out of the encirclement. Qin Xuan used the power of lightning released by all-directional thunder prison to attack the Zerg swarm. Then, he controlled the power of lightning to kill the surrounding Zergs, trying his best to create a safe environment for everyone. As for the Zergs that escaped the net, there would naturally be others to deal with them. However, what Qin Xuan did not expect was that the Zerg were so dense that they covered the sky as if there was no end to them. They could not break out at all. Seeing this, Qin Xuan finally stopped hesitating. He took out 3 second-grade star stones and installed them on the Zeus technology gloves, preparing to break out of the encirclement with the power of the gloves. Chapter 719. When everyone saw Qin Xuan's actions, their faces showed a touch of curiosity. Although many of them had heard of the power of Zeus technology gloves, they had not seen it with their own eyes. At this time, facing the swarm of insects that blotted out the sky, Qin Xuan chose to use Zeus technology gloves to break through. It seemed that he was 100% sure of success. Just when everyone was thinking about this, Qin Xuan raised his hand and pointed the Zeus technology gloves at the swarm of insects in front of him. Along with his angry roar, Zeus technology gloves suddenly released an extremely bright light, and the whole world was immediately dyed white. When the light dissipated and the sky became gloomy again. The flying insects that surrounded the crowd had disappeared without a trace. It was as if the previous scene was just an illusion. Such a sudden change caused everyone's expression to become extremely shocked. The power of Zeus technology gloves is terrifying. Shen Feng looked at the scene in front of him and couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. No wonder before departure, Chairman Tian Yuan repeatedly reminded him that he must not provoke Qin Chuan. If Qin Chuan's attack was aimed at him, then he would probably be a dead man now. Tian Mei had heard of the power of Zeus technology gloves a long time ago, but she had never really taken Zeus technology gloves seriously. Now, after witnessing the power of Zeus technology gloves with her own eyes, she felt that she was simply wrong before. Just when everyone was amazed, Qin Chuan had finished replacing the star stones of Zeus technology gloves. Although the attack just now was powerful, the consumption was also extremely shocking. The majestic energy contained in 3-second grade star stones was exhausted in an instant, which made Qin Chuan's heart ache. Now we are safe for the time being. Let's find a place to rest and discuss the next plan of action. Everyone also knew that it was not good to stay here for a long time, so they all followed behind Qin Chuan and continued to move forward. When they were far away from the previous battlefield, Qin Chuan found a hill to land on. After checking that there were no problems around, he dug a big hole in the hill and stepped in. Everyone followed behind Qin Chuan. Qin Chuan looked at Shen Feng and asked, "Do you have a map?" Shen Feng shook his head and said to Qin Chuan, "This place has completely deviated from the terrain that I am familiar with. I also don't know where this is. If we want to find our starting point, we must go back the way we came." Qin Chuan shook his head when he heard Shen Feng's words. He glanced at the people around him and said to Shen Feng, "There are only 20 of us left alive. Some of us are injured, and some of us have lost our will to fight. If we go back the way we came, we will definitely encounter Zerg. Basically, we won't be able to make it back. Then, there is no way for us to leave." Shen Feng frowned. "Only that mountain has the coordinates to return. Can we reposition it?" Qin Chuan frowned and asked, "There shouldn't be any technical difficulties, right? Unfortunately, the only 2 people we can reposition are already dead. Otherwise, we wouldn't have to go through so much trouble." Shen Feng smiled bitterly and said to Qin Chuan, "I originally thought that you would be able to return to that place safely. I didn't expect this to happen." Tian Mei, who was standing at the side, heard Shen Feng's words. She couldn't help but show a touch of guilt on her face. She whispered, "I'm sorry. It's my willfulness that has implicated everyone. If it wasn't for her willfulness, at least 10 of them could have left alive. However, because of her, all 20 of them were trapped here. Perhaps they would all die in the end. She couldn't shirk this responsibility. You can't be blamed for this. If you want to blame someone, blame me." Shen Feng sighed and said, "You are also doing this out of kindness. You want to save us people who are trapped in a siege. Let's take a break for now." Qin Chuan glanced at Lixing. "Take a few brothers to stand guard." Lixing nodded. He pointed to a few people who were in good condition and walked out of the cave. Qin Chuan sat on the ground and directly took out a special nutrient from his storage ring to replenish the energy needed by his body. Then, he silently closed his eyes and began to rest. Tian Mei, who was standing at the side, saw Qin Chuan like this. She hesitated for a moment and slowly walked to Qin Chuan's side. She whispered to Qin Chuan, "If we rely on the power of Zeus technology gloves, can we break all the way to the starting mountain?" Hearing Tian Mei's words, Qin Chuan slightly raised his eyes to look at her. Then, he closed his eyes again. It seemed that he didn't want to communicate with Tian Mei too much. Tian Mei was a little distressed when she saw this. "I admit that I did something wrong before, but I also want everyone to leave alive. Can you say something?" Qin Chuan didn't even bother to open his eyes this time. He directly said to Tian Mei, "I want to rest. Can you please be quiet?" Tian Mei saw Qin Chuan's attitude. She was angry and annoyed. She angrily turned back to Shen Feng's side and sat down. She said to Shen Feng, "This guy really has a bad temper. I was talking to him nicely. Look at his attitude." Shen Feng looked at Tian Mei and said, Actually, you should understand him. Tian Mei frowned and asked puzzledly, "Why should I understand him? He could have lived more comfortably than now. It was you who kidnapped him by leaving here, making him unable to act according to his plan. He had no choice but to listen to your arrangement. Now that we are in trouble, he must be very upset. If you go to him again, he will naturally not give you a good face." Hearing Shan Feng's explanation, Tian Mei whispered, "But I have already admitted my mistake and apologized." If apologizing was useful, then this world wouldn't be so dangerous. Shan Feng chuckled and said to Tian Mei, "You're still young. The things and people you've come into contact with are still too little. Wait until you mature and look back at today's matter. Then you'll know how naive your decision was." He has the Zeus technology gloves. We can rely on the power of the Zeus technology gloves to kill our way out, can't we? Tian Mei was still somewhat unconvinced. He is just stingy. He can't bear to part with those few star stones. At worst, I will provide him with star stones. The reason why he didn't do this must be because he has his own considerations. You don't have to think too much about it. Shan Feng said to Tian Mei, "You should also rest quickly. We can't know when we will set off again." In this kind of place where danger could appear at any time, it was necessary to maintain sufficient physical strength. Tian Mei heard this and turned her gaze to Qin Chuan. After fiercely glaring at Qin Chuan, she closed her eyes and began to rest. On the other side, Qin Chuan didn't care about Tian Mei's little actions at all. This was because he was having an extremely important secret conversation with the runic sword in his mind. Chapter 720. Big Brother, can you help me? Qin Chuan looked at the motionless runic sword with a helpless face. He was really thirsty from talking, but the runic sword did not respond at all. "Big Brother, I'm in a very dangerous situation now. I might lose my life at any time. Can you help me this once?" Qin Chuan sighed and said to the runic sword, "Besides, I'm not asking you to help me. You just need to lend me the galaxy sword will temporarily." Ever since the galaxy sword will was kidnapped by the runic sword, Qin Chuan had never seen it again. He could use it occasionally, but the trouble he was facing now was definitely not something that could be solved with just one use of the galaxy sword will. He needed to use the galaxy sword will to draw out the galaxy sword that he did not know where it was. This time, Qin Chuan was not only thinking of escaping from here, but he also wanted to wipe out all the Zerg here. This idea had actually been hovering in Qin Chuan's mind for a long time. He did not want to escape from the Sword God's ruins in such a sorry state. He wanted to eliminate all the Zerg here. If he only relied on Qin Chuan's own strength, it would naturally be impossible to do this. Even if Qin Chuan had the Zeus technology gloves, it would be very difficult to do so. But if he had the galaxy sword on top of the Zeus technology gloves, everything would be different. It was not realistic for Qin Chuan to control both the Zeus technology gloves and the galaxy sword at the same time, but he could control the galaxy sword through the galaxy sword will. As long as he could achieve this, his idea of killing his way through the ruins would have a high probability of becoming a reality. However, there is a certain degree of difficulty in actually implementing this idea. First of all, the runic sword needed to be willing to temporarily release the galaxy sword will. "Big Brother, let's talk about it, okay? Let's make a deal. I help you do one thing, and you help me this time. How about it?" Qin Chuan looked at the runic sword with a serious face. "Big Brother, to be honest, I'm willing to do anything for you." Hearing Qin Chuan's words, the runic sword seemed to be a little moved. It made a buzzing sound, as if it was asking Qin Chuan if he was really willing to do anything for it. After Qin Chuan sensed the meaning of the runic sword, he said without hesitation, "Big Brother, what I said is true. Just tell me, what do you want me to do?" The rune sword suddenly became active and came to the side of the little armored dragon not far away. It circled around the little armored dragon a few times and then made a rubbing action. Qin Chuan was stunned when he saw this scene. He asked hesitantly, "Big Brother, you want to use the little armored dragon to sharpen the sword?" The rune sword clearly told Qin Chuan that this was what he thought. After getting a definite answer from the runic sword, Qin Chuan couldn't help but have a headache. The runic sword wanted to use the little dragon to sharpen its sword. Where did this idea come from? The little dragon, who was sleeping on Qinchuan's Yao Dan, seemed to have felt the aura from the runic sword and suddenly woke up. When it saw the runic sword that was close at hand, the little dragon angrily slammed into the runic sword, which actually made a very clear sound. After the little dragon knocked the runic sword away, it hid behind Qinchuan and looked at Qinchuan with an aggrieved look, as if it was accusing the runic sword of all kinds of crimes. Seeing this, Qinchuan showed a very gentle smile on his face and said to the little dragon, "Actually, he just wants to use you to sharpen his sword. He doesn't have any bad intentions." Hearing Qinchuan's words, the little dragon couldn't help but widen its eyes. It opened its mouth and made a very childish sound, as if it was strongly objecting. "Let's talk about it." Qinchuan looked at the little dragon. "You let him sharpen his sword, and I'll let you eat the meat of the savage wolf you ate last time. How about it?" Hearing Qinchuan's words, the little dragon's eyes suddenly lit up. It flew around Qinchuan a few times, as if asking Qinchuan where the meat was. It already couldn't help but drool. Seeing the little dragon revealing its gluttonous nature, Qinchuan's confidence suddenly increased. He asked the little dragon, "Then you agree?" After hesitating for a moment, the little dragon nodded lightly and patted its belly hard, as if saying that it had to eat its fill before it was willing to make such a deal. "Don't worry, I'll definitely let you eat your fill." Seeing the little dragon agree, Qinchuan immediately turned to the runic sword and asked, "You have no objections now, right?" The runic sword made an up and down motion again, meaning to tell Qinchuan that it would only be willing to lend the Milky Way sword intent to Qinchuan temporarily after it finished sharpening the sword. Qinchuan naturally had no objections to this. After reaching a three-way agreement with the runic sword and the little dragon, Qinchuan's consciousness immediately returned to his body. Then he took out the corpses of 10 savage wolves from his storage ring. Back then, when he was collecting star stones to deal with the savage wolf king, he had casually collected over 100 savage wolves' corpses. It was enough for the little dragon to eat for a while. The moment Qinchuan took out the corpses of the savage wolves, the little dragon flew out with a whoosh. In the blink of an eye, it absorbed all 10 savage wolves. Then, it patted its round belly and returned to Qinchuan's brain. It laid comfortably on Qinchuan's Yao Dan and prepared to rest. At the same time, the runic sword also arrived in front of the little dragon. It placed the blade on the little dragon's back and began to sharpen the sword happily. Qinchuan patiently waited at the side until the runic sword finished sharpening 10 minutes later. Then he coughed softly and said, "Brother, isn't it time for you to fulfill your promise now?" The runic sword made a buzzing sound. Then, a silver-white long sword separated from the runic sword and slowly floated into Qinchuan's hand. Looking at the Milky Way sword intent in his hand, Qinchuan grinned and said to the runic sword, "Thank you for your help, brother. It's already been 2 hours. Are we still going to rest here?" Tianmei glanced at Qinchuan, who was still resting with his eyes closed. She couldn't help but whisper to Shenfeng, who was sitting beside her. When Shenfeng heard this, he glanced at Tianmei and signaled for her to calm down. Then he said to Tianmei, "Qinchuan naturally has his reasons for doing this. Don't think too much about it. Just rest at ease." Just when Tianmei wanted to say something, a sudden shout came from outside the cave. Then a figure hurriedly ran in. Lixing looked at Qinchuan, who was resting with his eyes closed, and said anxiously, "Qinchuan, we found Zerg's tracks. They are coming here to surround us. We are surrounded again." Hearing Lixing's words, Qinchuan slowly opened his eyes. A light flashed in his eyes. He said coldly, "Just in time." Chapter 721. After hearing Lixing's words, Shenfeng immediately stood up and asked Qinchuan, "What are you going to do? Are we going to continue to break out?" "Break out? Why do we have to break out?" Qinchuan chuckled. "Just stand at the entrance of the cave and watch my performance." Hearing Qinchuan's words, Shenfeng asked curiously, "Are you going to use the Zerg gloves to kill all these Zerg?" Tianmei, who was at the side, couldn't help but snort coldly and whisper, "Besides using the Zeus gloves, does he have any other abilities?" Qingchuan glanced at Tian Mei and smiled faintly. "I really don't plan to use the Zeus gloves this time. I want to try some new tricks." After saying this, Qingchuan ignored Shen Feng and Tian Mei and walked out of the cave. Shen Feng stretched out his hand at Qingchuan, but in the end, he couldn't stop Qingchuan. "Tian Mei, don't provoke him like this. If he doesn't rely on the Zeus gloves, Qingchuan will only be at the intermediate gold core stage no matter how strong he is." Shen Feng looked at Tian Mei with a slight reproach. "If Qingchuan is injured because of his quarrel with you, it will be a great loss for us." Hearing Shen Feng's words, Tian Mei whispered, "I'm just saying, he's not a fool. He shouldn't really not use the Zeus gloves. Let's go and see the situation." Shen Feng walked outside, wanted to see how Qingchuan was going to deal with this trouble. Outside the cave, Qingchuan stood in the open space and looked into the distance. Looking at the dense swarm of flying insects in the sky, he couldn't help but recall the insect plague he faced in the carefree secret realm. The scene in front of him was even more terrifying than that. "Qingchuan, what are you going to do?" Lu Xing looked at the densely packed flying insects in the distance and said with an extremely solemn expression, "Although the individual strength of these flying insects isn't strong, there are too many of them. Even the Zeus Tech gloves can only clear a small area at a time. Now we're surrounded by flying insects everywhere. There's no way we can clear them all." Although the Zeus Tech gloves were strong, they needed to be constantly replaced with starstones. Just the short time it took to replace the starstones was enough for the insects to kill them countless times over. At this moment, Shen Feng and Tian Mei had already walked out of the cave. When they saw the sky filled with flying insects in the distance, their faces suddenly turned extremely ugly. The number of flying insects had completely exceeded their expectations. "Qingchuan, I'm really sorry this time." Shen Feng felt very guilty. "You could have escaped." In the face of such a terrifying number of flying insects, even though Shen Feng was in the early stage of the nascent soul realm, he couldn't muster up any resistance. Instead of being swallowed to death by these flying insects, Shen Feng would rather commit suicide. However, he still couldn't let go of Tian Mei in his heart. He felt that he had let down the kindness that Chairman Tian Yuan had shown him all these years. At this moment, in the face of this incomparably despairing sea of insects, Tian Mei finally realized how stupid her stubbornness was. However, it was too late to say this now. "Let's not talk about this now." Qingchuan stretched his body and said to everyone, "Get ready, I'm going to start acting tough." Everyone was originally nervous and uneasy. When they heard Qingchuan's words, the expressions on their faces could not help but become somewhat strange. They had already entered a desperate situation where there was only a slim chance of survival. Yet he still had the mood to joke around. Just as everyone was thinking about this, the swarm of insects suddenly accelerated and rushed over. In the blink of an eye, they were less than 10,000 meters away from them. It was also at this moment that Qingchuan suddenly roared, "Sword come!" Buzz! On an ancient battlefield in the center of the Sword God's ruins, a violent buzzing sound suddenly rang out. Then the earth shook and the mountains shook. An extremely astonishing silver-white sword aura rushed into the sky and dispersed the thick dark clouds in the sky. Starlight poured down on the ground as if the Milky Way had descended from the 9 heavens. On a mountain peak not far away, Zerg, who was recuperating, was awakened. Pairs of eyes looked in the direction of the sword aura and unconsciously revealed a look of horror in their eyes. This is why did the Milky Way sword suddenly move? A low hiss of disbelief sounded from the cave. A black beetle crawled out of the cave and looked at the sword aura in the distance with a look of disbelief on its face. Clang! An extremely crisp sound of a sharp sword being unsheathed resounded between heaven and earth. A silver-white long sword turned into a swimming dragon and soared into the sky. As if it had been summoned by something, it went straight to the west. Someone is summoning the Milky Way sword. The black beetle seemed to have thought of something, and the expression on its face immediately became ugly. I have to wake His Highness up as soon as possible. This is... Everyone looked at the stars in the sky in astonishment. Looking at the slowly flowing river of stars, everyone's faces were filled with shock. Is it the Milky Way sword intent? Shenfeng was a little uncertain. In their investigation of Qinchuan, they did know that Qinchuan had mastered the Milky Way sword intent. However, this momentum was a little too shocking. Just as Shenfeng was about to say something to Qinchuan, the swarm of insects in the distant sky suddenly became chaotic. Then, a silver-white swimming dragon broke through the swarm of insects and rushed straight to Qinchuan. Then, it turned into a silver-white long sword and stabbed into the ground in front of Qinchuan, emitting a frightening and powerful aura. Looking at the silver-white long sword that suddenly appeared, Shenfeng seemed to have thought of something and exclaimed, "This is the Milky Way sword?" Hearing Shenfeng's exclamation, everyone's faces showed a touch of disbelief. How could the Milky Way sword appear here? Just as everyone was in shock, Qinchuan slowly stepped forward and reached out to hold the hilt of the Milky Way sword. He pulled out the Milky Way sword and pointed the blade at the swarm of insects in the sky. Buzz! Accompanied by a clear sound of the sword, the Milky Way poured down from the sky, and countless bright stars fell into the swarm of insects. In the blink of an eye, the swarm of insects in the sky melted like snow in the spring and disappeared completely. For everyone who witnessed this scene, the shock in their hearts could not be described with words. They had thought of countless scenarios, but they had never thought that the swarm of insects would disappear from the world in such a way. Everyone's eyes subconsciously shifted from the sky to Qinchuan. Looking at the tall and straight back of Qinchuan holding the sword, everyone seemed to see the peerless demeanor of the sword god Su Inha in the past. At this time, Qinchuan, who was standing in front of everyone, slowly turned to face the crowd. He smiled gently and asked, "Let me ask you, what do you think of my acting tough?" Hearing Qinchuan's words, everyone's consciousness returned from their fantasy to reality. However, they could not help but exclaim repeatedly, if what happened today was spread to the center of Kunlun's field, it would cause great waves. Chapter 722. Qinchuan, how'd you do it? Shenfeng stared at Qinchuan, dumbfounded. He had thought that they might find traces of the Milky Way sword, but he never thought that the Milky Way sword would appear in front of them in such a way. Qinchuan grinned and said, "Of course, it's because of that shout. The Milky Way sword heard it, so it naturally came." Hearing Qinchuan's explanation, Shenfeng didn't know what to say. If anyone could summon the Milky Way sword just by shouting, then the Milky Way sword wouldn't have been left in the ruins of the universe for so many years. "Qinchuan, you are really amazing." Lu Xing ran to Qinchuan with an excited face. Looking at the Milky Way sword in Qinchuan's hand, he was extremely excited. He had heard of the Milky Way sword's name long ago, but it was the first time he saw it with his own eyes. Moreover, it was at such a close distance. Qinchuan looked at Lu Xing's excited appearance and laughed. He said to Lu Xing, "Don't be excited, stay away from me first." While speaking, Qinchuan wanted to put away the Milky Way sword, but the Milky Way sword emitted a sharp buzzing sound, filled with killing intent. Seeing this scene, Qinchuan helplessly said to the Milky Way sword, "Brother, I know you are eager to take revenge, but we don't have to be in a hurry. Let's take it slow." Hearing Qinchuan's words, the Milky Way sword stopped buzzing and quieted down. Qinchuan also put away the Milky Way sword temporarily in the storage ring. However, who would have thought that the Milky Way sword didn't want to enter the storage ring and flew into Qinchuan's brain? Qinchuan really didn't know what to say about this. It seemed that every time he encountered these strange existences, they liked to drill into his brain. Seeing this scene, Shenfeng curiously asked Qinchuan, "You can communicate with the Milky Way sword?" Qinchuan nodded and said to Shenfeng, "Divine swords have spirits. This is not a rare thing. The Milky Way sword had been a Tao weapon for so many years, and it had already nurtured a sword spirit. Although it was still the most basic sword spirit, basic communication was not a problem. Just now, the Milky Way sword was anxious to take revenge because of the sword god's death. Shun Feng sighed. The fall of the sword god back then was indeed a great loss to us. Qin Chuan nodded and said, "Let's talk while we walk." Walk? Are we going back? They way of God's world. They would not be disturbed by Zerg's way God way. They could safely. Hearing Tianmei's words, Shen Feng gave Qin Chuan a meaningful look and said, "You're not talking about going back, right?" Qin Chuan smiled and nodded. Then he shook his head and said to Shen Feng, "You could go back first, but I can't. I have to finish what I promised the Milky Way sword before I go back. You have to think about it carefully." Avenging the sword god is no small matter. The sword god was many times stronger than you, but he still died here. Even if you have the Zeus technology gloves and the Milky Way sword, you may not succeed in avenging the sword god. Shen Feng looked at Qin Chuan seriously. "You better not be impulsive. I have my own considerations." Qin Chuan smiled. "You just need to tell me if I can still leave after you leave." Shen Feng looked at Qin Chuan deeply and said, "After we leave, as long as the portal at the center of the Kunlun field is not closed, the portal here can be maintained for a day. You must go back through the portal within a day. Otherwise, you will be trapped here." Qin Chuan nodded and said to Shen Feng, "I hope you don't close the portal immediately after you go back. Give me a chance to leave. Don't worry, you saved our lives, especially Tianmei. No matter what, we won't do such an ungrateful thing." Shen Feng promised Qin Chuan, "As long as I don't die, no one will be able to close the teleportation gate." "Qin Chuan, come with us." Tianmei suddenly advised Qin Chuan. "Now is not the time to be impulsive. It won't be too late to avenge the sword god after you advance to the nascent soul stage." Qin Chuan shook his head and didn't say anything more to Tianmei. He turned to Lixing and said, "Take care of the brothers. Remember to give the dead flower to Wang Ming's sister." After saying this, Qin Chuan turned to leave. "Qin Chuan," Tianmei suddenly called out to Qin Chuan. She looked at Qin Chuan and gritted her teeth. "You must come back alive." Qin Chuan didn't even turn his head. He just waved his hand and walked down the mountain step by step. Looking at Qin Chuan's departing figure, Lu Xing's gaze was a little complicated. He whispered, "I can't understand him." Shen Feng nodded and agreed. "I can't understand him either, but he is a hero." Kacha, kacha. The black beetle walked in the dark cave and burrowed deep into the ground. The deeper it went, the stronger the evil aura became. When the black beetle reached the end of the cave, a huge deep pit appeared in front of its eyes. The deep pit was filled with purple mist, making it impossible to see what was inside. However, the fierce thumping of a heartbeat proved to the world that something was sleeping in this deep pit. "Your Highness! Your Highness! Your Highness!" The black beetle stood at the edge of the cave and constantly shouted into the deep pit. However, its voice was like a stone sinking into the sea. It didn't get any response. Seeing that there was no response from the deep pit, the black beetle was somewhat helpless. It could only turn around and leave. At this moment, a very long breathing sound came from the deep pit, followed by a low voice. "Amaya, I heard it." Hearing this very familiar voice, the black beetle called Amaya immediately turned around and looked at the deep pit with surprise. "Your Highness, you finally woke up. What happened?" "I can't feel its threat," Amaya immediately replied. "Your Highness, someone summoned the Milky Way sword away. So that's how it is." His Highness' voice suddenly became somewhat ethereal. "How many years have passed? Finally someone appeared." Rumble. An extremely violent earthquake sound came from the deep pit. The thick purple mist suddenly dispersed, and the scene in the deep pit was presented in front of Amaya. In this huge, deep pit, a huge beetle corpse was lying there. On the chest of this beetle corpse, a huge purple cocoon was beating and releasing a powerful sound. Rip! Along with the sound of the cocoon being torn, a white, arm slowly stretched out from it. Chapter 723. Everyone had left, and only Qin Chuan was left. Looking at the desolate scene around him, Qin Chuan could not help but feel a little lonely. Perhaps the path I chose was a lonely one to begin with. Qin Chuan murmured in a low voice. He could not help but look at the dark sky in the distance. He could clearly feel that an extremely evil and terrifying aura was awakening. It was definitely not an existence that he could deal with his current realm. Buzz. With a buzzing sound, the Milky Way sword rushed out of Qin Chuan's brain. The blade pointed in the direction of the aura. High fighting spirit. Is this the expert who once fought with sword god Su Inha? I can feel my body trembling uncontrollably from thousands of miles away. It's really terrifying. Qin Chuan looked at the Milky Way sword floating in front of him and asked with a smile, "When Sword God died, this guy must have been seriously injured, right?" As he spoke, Qin Chuan slowly took a step forward and said softly, "Maybe today I can complete what Sword God failed to do." Buzz. The Milky Way sword buzzed again. It seemed that it could not wait to avenge its late master. "Since you're in such a hurry, let's go." Qin Chuan roared and drove the battle armor straight ahead. Center of the Kunlun Field, upper house. When Xin Feng's group passed through the teleportation door and returned to the underground hall where they had set off, dozens of figures who had been waiting for a long time immediately surrounded them. They carried out a comprehensive examination of Xin Feng's group. After confirming that there was no problem with anyone, they hurriedly sent the injured to the medical room for treatment. At the same time, the figure of Chairman Tian Yuan also appeared in the underground hall. When he saw Tian Mei standing beside Xin Feng, he could not help but let out a long sigh of relief. "Father!" Tian Mei saw Chairman Tian Yuan and immediately walked over. Tian Yuan reached out to wipe away the dirt on Tian Mei's face and said in a low voice, "You're too reckless. I'm sorry for making you worry." Tian Mei looked at Tian Yuan apologetically. "I didn't expect this operation to be so dangerous." Hearing Tian Mei's words, Tian Yuan could not help but look at the other returning members in the hall. When he found that Qin Chuan was not there, he could not help but frown slightly and asked Xin Feng, "Is Qin Chuan dead?" "No, I'm not sure about Qin Chuan's situation now." Xin Feng looked at Tian Yuan with a complicated gaze and said, "Qin Chuan saved all of us." Tian Yuan gave Xin Feng a deep glance when he heard that and said, "Explain the matter clearly. Right here." "Yes." Xin Feng agreed and immediately told Tian Yuan everything that happened in the Sword God ruins from the beginning to the end, no matter how big or small. After listening to Xin Feng's narration, he asked, "Qin Chuan summoned the Milky Way sword. You say Qin Chuan summoned. Qin Chuan," he said. "Indeed, when I saw the Milky Way sword descend from the sky, I was completely stunned." Xin Feng sighed and said, "At that moment, I seem to have seen the rebirth of Sword God Su Inha." Tian Yuan looked at the teleportation gate and said with a frown, "The matter of avenging Sword God can be discussed at length. Why was he so impulsive?" "Father, I don't think the one who was impulsive is Qin Chuan, but the Milky Way sword," Tian Mei whispered to Tian Yuan. At that time, the Milky Way sword descended from the sky and killed the flying insects in the sky. Only then were we able to escape, and Qin Chuan had no choice but to follow the Milky Way sword to seek revenge. He did it for all of us, I know what you said. Tian Yuan turned to look at Tian Mei. "But it's too dangerous to keep the teleportation gate open." No one knew how many Zerg were hidden in the Sword God ruins, and how many Zerg elites were there. From the fact that the insufferably arrogant Sword God Su Inha had fallen here, it could be seen that the Sword God ruins must be filled with danger. Now that the teleportation gate was opened, Zerg could also come here through the teleportation gate. Once Zerg's army arrived, it might be a devastating blow to the center of heirs. But we promised Qin Chuan that we would open the teleportation gate. Tian Mei was a little anxious. If the teleportation gate was closed, unless Qin Chuan could live until the next time they went, Qin Chuan might not be able to come back. At this moment, the other counselors also came to the underground hall. Kong Ming walked to Tian Yuan and said to him directly, "We have heard about the matter. The teleportation gate must be closed immediately." Hearing Kong Ming's words, Tian Yuan frowned slightly and said in a low voice, "Are you telling me what to do?" "President, I definitely didn't mean that. I'm just showing you our attitude." Kong Ming smiled. "We have already discussed on the way here. We can't keep the teleportation gate open just because of Qin Xuan. It's too dangerous. Uncle Kong Ming, Qin Xuan saved all of us. We also promised him that we would open the teleportation gate for him." Tian Mei couldn't help but interrupt. "We can't go back on our words." Hearing Tian Mei's words, Kong Ming looked at Tian Mei and asked, "Have you ever thought about how many people there are in the center of airs? Have you ever thought about what will happen once Zerg comes to the center of airs through the teleportation gate? If Zerg is weak, it's fine. But even Sword God Su Inha died at the hands of those Zerg. Do you think we can stop them? If we can't stop Zerg's invasion, not only will the center of airs be destroyed, but also the Star Dragon Federation and the Demon Realm." Tian Mei said anxiously, "But these things didn't happen. It's too late to regret it when it happens." Sha Zhao walked over slowly and said to Tian Yuan, "President, for the safety of the center of airs, I suggest that we close the teleportation gate immediately. If we wait until Hua Wuying comes, things will be troublesome." Sha is right. Besides, Qin Xuan has the Zeus technology glove and the Milky Way sword. He might not die in the Sword God ruins. Xing He looked at everyone. "It's time to make a decision. We can't delay any longer." Hearing everyone's suggestion, Tian Yuan pursed his lips and said in a low voice, "We'll do as you say. Close the teleportation gate immediately." "President, Father," Shen Feng and Tian Mei exclaimed at the same time. They had promised Qin Xuan that they would open the teleportation gate for him, but now the teleportation gate was going to be closed. This meant that they had caused Qin Xuan's death. "Don't say any more." Tian Yuan took a deep look at Tian Mei. "Qin Xuan's personal matters are small. We should consider the big picture." With Tian Yuan's order, the staff of the teleportation gate immediately acted. In just a few breaths, they cut off the energy supply of the teleportation gate and closed it. Chapter 724. "What are you doing?" The moment the portal closed, Hua Wuying's figure appeared in the underground hall. When she saw the portal dim, she immediately roared. Hearing Hua Wuying's angry roar, everyone looked at Hua Wuying. Xinghe looked at Hua Wuying innocently and said, "We are also thinking for the entire air center. Don't be so agitated, okay? Let's sit down and slowly." Bang! Before He could finish his words, his body had already flew out with a whoosh. He fiercely hit the wall of the underground hall and exploded with an extremely shocking roar. And the person who attacked he was the furious Hua Wuying. "There are still people who haven't come back. Why did you close the portal?" Hua Wuying didn't even look at He in the distance and directly questioned Tian Yuan. Now that the portal was closed, Qin Xuan would be trapped in the Sword God ruins. This was something she absolutely couldn't accept. Facing Hua Wuying's question, Tian Yuan pursed his lips and said, "We are thinking for the entire air center. We can't let the entire air center fall into danger because of Qin Xuan alone." Tian Yuan knew clearly that some people didn't want to close the portal for the sake of the overall situation. They simply didn't want Qin Xuan to come back. However, as the chairman of the air center, he had to think for the entire air center. Closing the portal was imperative. What a good consideration for the air center. Hua Wuying sneered. "Each and every one of you is really chivalrous and courageous." Hearing Hua Wuying's mockery, Sha Zhao coldly snorted and said, "At least we are thinking for everyone? What about you? You're selfish. Looks like if I don't show my might, you guys really think I'm a sick cat." Hua Wuying looked at Sha Zhao. "If you have enough guts, then enough." Tian Yuan suddenly shouted angrily and interrupted Hua Wuying's words. "Pay attention to your status." Hearing Tian Yuan's words, Hua Wuying sneered. "Qin Xuan is right. You guys think you are high and mighty and look down on everyone, as if you were different from the masses. But in fact, you're just a group of ordinary people with great power. You are all flies and dogs. How dare you? Su Baijiang snorted. Hua Wuying, it's not just your people who died in there. Almost all of our people were annihilated. Don't make it sound like you've been wronged. At the end of the day, you just can't bear to part with the Zeus technology gloves and the Milky Way sword. I think you're the one who can't bear to part with her. Hua Wuying sneered. Why? Are you afraid that Qin Xuan will come back with the Milky Way sword and chop off your dog head? Seeing that the situation was about to spiral out of control, an extremely vast aura suddenly descended upon the underground hall. It was like a towering mountain pressing down on everyone's heads. Even Hua Wuying and the other late nascent soul stage cultivators' faces turned extremely solemn. Are you done talking? Tian Yuan's face was gloomy. His gaze was extremely cold as he looked at everyone. Do you still put me, the chairman, in your eyes? Seeing that Tian Yuan was angry, Hua Wuying and Su Baijiang, who were quarreling with each other, also quieted down. Seeing this, Tian Yuan slowly withdrew his aura and said to everyone, "Everyone disperse. Today's matter is confidential. If I find out who is talking nonsense outside, bear the consequences." On the control department's flying ship, Lu Xing stood in front of Hua Wuying with a face full of self-blame. He did not know what to say. At that time, he had tried his best to inform Hua Wuying of the news, but he was still a step too late and could not stop the portal from closing. I'm sorry, Director. I should have stood up directly at that time. What's the use of standing up for you? Hua Wuying covered her face with her hand tiredly. They won't let Qin Xuan come back alive. It was useless no matter who stood up at that time. They had already kidnapped Tian Yuan with hypocritical benevolence and morality. Even if I had arrived in time, I wouldn't have been able to stop all this from happening. Hua Wuying had thought it through very clearly. If it were not for this, her reaction at that time would not have been as simple as quarreling. Why? Lu Xing was puzzled. Is it really because of the Milky Way sword? Do you know what the Milky Way sword represents? Hua Wuying took a deep look at Lu Xing. The Milky Way sword is a Taoist weapon personally refined by sword god Su Yinhe. Moreover, it is a high-grade Taoist weapon. If Qin Xuan brings the Milky Way sword back, if the Milky Way sword falls into my hands, even Tian Yuan may not be able to defeat me. Do you think those people who attacked the Zeus Technology Research Institute back then would dare to let Qin Xuan come back? Hearing Hua Wuying's words, Lu Xing could not help but be stunned. He did not expect those people to be afraid of this kind of thing. Other than Qin Xuan, no one can control the Milky Way sword. They should know this. Lu Xing gritted his teeth and said that Qin Xuan has the label of the control department on him. He is my man. Whether the Milky Way sword falls into my hands or not, they can't just watch Qin Xuan return with a full load. Hua Wuying sighed softly. This time, I have harmed Qin Xuan. If she had not asked Qin Xuan to go to the Sword God ruins, this would not have happened. Sword God ruins. At this time, Qin Xuan still did not know that the portal had closed. He had already followed the Milky Way sword deep into the Sword God ruins. Along the way, he encountered many Zerg. However, what was strange was that these Zerg did not have any intention of attacking him at all. They even hid when they saw him coming. Of course, Qin Xuan still had some self-awareness. He knew that these Zerg were not afraid of him, but of the Milky Way sword. It was the pressure of the Milky Way sword that made these Zerg not dare to act rashly. There are really too many of them. Qin Xuan looked at the Zerg lurking on the ground and could not help but sigh. This was the first time he had seen so many Zerg. Each Zerg had at least the strength of a cultivator in the Gold Core stage. The power of these Zerg added together was enough to destroy half of the air's center. Was my decision to let them open the portal for me a little too hasty? Qin Xuan frowned slightly. If he could kill all the Zerg here and leave safely, there would be no problem. However, if he was careless and lost, or even died here, then the portal would become a ticking time bomb that could explode at any time. But it's too late to think about these things now. Let's go and meet those Zerg first. Chuan looked into the distance. A towering mountain that pierced through the clouds gradually appeared in front of him. The incomparably evil aura he felt earlier was emitted from this mountain. It seemed that this mountain was his and the Milky Way sword's destination. Chapter 725. Asterisk 1. Asterisk, the Milky Way sword flying ahead suddenly stopped when it was about 10,000 meters away from the mountain. Chuan slowly came to the side of the Milky Way sword and looked at the huge ancient battlefield in front of the mountain. On the ancient battlefield, countless black beetles were neatly arranged together, like an army being inspected by their superiors, exuding a solemn atmosphere. Seeing this scene, Chuan's expression changed slightly and said to the Milky Way sword, "These are Zerg's true elites. They are indeed the elites of the Saint Clan." The moment Chuan's voice fell, a black beetle suddenly appeared in front of Chuan and sized up Chuan with unscrupulous eyes. Chuan looked at the black beetle that had suddenly appeared and was rather surprised. "You can speak our language? When we attacked the exiled land, we received professional training, so of course we can speak your language." While speaking, the black beetle's body suddenly wriggled and turned into an old man in black armor. His appearance was no different from a human's, which surprised Chuan. "I've seen some Zer before, but it's the first time I've seen one that can completely transform into a human like you. My name is Amaya. I used to be a palace steward of the Saint Palace." Amaya looked calmly at Chuan. "Our Highness wishes to meet you." Chuan chuckled and said to Amaya, "I don't think there's any need for me to meet the Highness you speak of. You're Zerg, I'm a human, we're enemies. Enemies only need to meet and kill each other. There's no need to talk face to face." The reason Chuan could communicate with Amaya so calmly was purely because he did not want to act rashly before fully understanding the strength of Zerg. "We weren't enemies in the first place, but we became enemies because of conflict of interest, right?" Amaya looked at Chuan with a subtle look. "Perhaps there will be a battle between us, but before that, Her Highness hopes to see you and have a good talk. You can rest assured that we will not attack you first." Chuan's eyes moved slightly. Then he said to Amaya, "If that's the case, then I'll go see your Highness. But leave the Milky Way sword here." Chuan wanted the Milky Way sword to stay because he was worried that the Milky Way sword would start a fight with Zerg when they met. Secondly, if he encountered any danger, the Milky Way sword could help him and deter Zerg's army. It would be an insurance. Milky Way sword did not have any objections to Chuan's arrangement. "Please lead the way." Chuan looked at Amaya, but he did not feel much fear. Amaya led Chuan towards the towering mountain in the distance. While walking, Amaya said to Chuan, "I thought the one who summoned the Milky Way sword would be a powerful human sword practitioner. I didn't expect it to be a young man like you." Chuan smiled and said to Amaya, "It's because I'm a young man that I have the courage to meet your Highness. If it was an old senior, you would have been killed the moment you appeared." Amaya was not angry at Chuan's words. He chuckled and asked Chuan, "How should I address you, Gongzi? Don't play this game with me. My name is Chuan, not some Gongzi." Chuan narrowed his eyes at Amaya and asked, "You can't be thinking that if you get close to me now, I won't kill you later, right?" Seeing Chuan being so forceful, Amaya was a little doubtful and asked, "You're so sure that the negotiation with our Highness will break down?" "To be honest, although I've already come this far with you, but I really don't think there's anything to talk about." Chuan looked at the mountain in front of him. "No matter what your Highness wants to say, it won't change my position." As he spoke, Amaya had already led Chuan to a platform halfway up the mountain. On the platform, a coquettish woman in a black silk dress was standing there, looking coldly at Chuan, who was slowly walking behind Amaya. Chuan had already noticed this coquettish woman from afar, but at that time, he did not connect this coquettish woman with the Highness Zerg he was about to meet. Seeing Amaya lead him directly to this woman, Chuan realized that this coquettish woman in front of him was the Highness that Amaya had mentioned. "Your Highness, this is the human talent who summoned the Milky Way sword," Qin Chuan. Amaya stood in front of the coquettish woman and acted extremely respectfully. Qin Chuan heard this and laughed. I didn't think that the highness he mentioned would actually be a woman. Hearing Qin Chuan's words, the coquettish woman smiled and said to Qin Chuan, My name is Shura. You can just call me by my name. Shura? Qin Chuan looked at Shura and asked, Why do you have to see me? Shura looked at Qin Chuan with a subtle gaze and said faintly, I just want to see what kind of person summoned the Milky Way sword, and how he compares to the person from back then. Then I must have disappointed you. Compared to the sword god Su Inha of the past, I'm really too far behind. I'm insignificant. Qin Chuan smiled faintly. I don't know what else you want to say, but just say it all. Qin Chuan, in my opinion, you're not worse than Su Inha. You're even better than him. You're too young. Shura looked deeply at Qin Chuan. If you're given more time, you'll definitely grow to an astonishing level. So? Qin Chuan looked at Shura. Do you want to strangle me in the cradle? Why must we fight and kill each other? Shura replied. Can't we just sit down and have a good talk? Qin Chuan looked at Shura with a strange gaze and asked, What do you think there's to talk about between us? Submit. Shura seriously said to Qin Chuan. I admire you very much. If you're willing to submit to me, I'll take you to see a wider world, a more brilliant civilization. Hearing Shura's words, Qin Chuan pointed at the Milky Way sword in the distant sky and said to Shura, Do you see that sword? Shura slightly narrowed his eyes and asked, So what if I see it? The Milky Way sword originally came for you. If I agree, it'll probably chop me to death. Qin Chuan looked at Shura. If there's nothing else, can I leave now? Hearing Qin Chuan's words, Shura looked deeply at Qin Chuan. Leave? Since you're here, don't leave. Chapter 7:26. Hearing Shura's murderous words, Qin Chuan couldn't help but laugh. So you finally revealed your true intentions? Qin Chuan looked at Shura. You just said that you'd only talk to me and wouldn't attack me. Now you want me to stay. You really change your face faster than flipping a book. Qin Chuan, you humans have a saying that goes a wise man submits to circumstances. I don't think you should be so unappreciative. Shura looked at Qin Chuan. Our divine clan's army will soon arrive at the banished land. With the strength of the banished land, you won't be able to stop us. Since that's the case, why sacrifice your life for nothing? Some things have nothing to do with life and death. Someone has to do it. Qin Chuan looked at Shura with a subtle gaze. From Shura's words, he had obtained very important information. Zerg was about to attack. What a pity. Shura slowly raised his hand. Countless white spider webs suddenly appeared around Qin Chuan, completely sealing off the space around Qin Chuan, not giving Qin Chuan any chance to escape. Qin Chuan looked at the spider webs in all directions and smiled gently. He said to Shura, Do you think you can stop me with these things? Shura looked at Qin Chuan's confident smile and couldn't help but raise his eyebrows slightly. He said, I don't believe you have a way to escape from me. If sword god Su Inha hadn't left behind the Milky Way sword to cover his retreat, he might not have been able to escape from her. She didn't believe that Qin Chuan, a mere middle-stage golden elixir cultivator, could escape from her hands. Unless, Shura seemed to have thought of something, and his expression changed slightly. He suddenly appeared in front of Qin Chuan and raised his hand to pierce Qin Chuan's chest. However, strangely, Qin Chuan's chest was pierced and not a single drop of blood flowed out. Qin Chuan lowered his head and looked at the palm that had pierced his chest. He grinned and said, How ruthless. Before he finished speaking, Qin Chuan's figure suddenly blurred and then turned into a thunderbolt that dissipated in the air. This is his doppelganger, not himself. Shura looked at the disappearing thunderbolt with a livid expression. Her eyes were full of anger. She was actually played by a little guy like Qin Chuan. Amia, who was standing at the side, was also extremely shocked. He had specially checked before and didn't realize that Qin Chuan was only a doppelganger. Your Highness, it was my negligence. And he was the one who made the mistake. Just as Shura was about to say something, The Milky Way sword in the distant sky suddenly emitted an extremely amazing aura. The dark clouds that shrouded the sky seemed to be pushed aside by an invisible hand, and the stars in the sky poured down. An extremely amazing sword energy shot out from 10,000 meters away, heading straight for Shura. The stars in the sky surged, and the endless power of the stars supported this sword energy, condensing into the Milky Way sword intent, causing the power of the sword energy to suddenly skyrocket, and its momentum became even more vast. Facing the attack of the Milky Way sword, Shura opened her mouth and let out a sharp whistle. She then raised her hand and waved. A purple mist surged out and blocked the path of the sword energy. However, the purple mist didn't cause any interference to the sword energy and was directly pierced through by the sword. At the same time, on a small hill in the distance, a figure suddenly emerged from the ground. Fortunately, I was prepared. Otherwise, I'm afraid I would have died today. The person who spoke was naturally Qin, who used his doppelganger to lure Shura. Before approaching the mountain, he had already made preparations in advance. He hid his main body here and used the power of thunder to transform into a doppelganger to follow the Milky Way sword. Originally, this preparation was just a precaution, but he didn't expect it to play an extremely important role. That woman should be the one who defeated sword god Su Inha. I'm definitely not her opponent. Qin looked at the Milky Way sword in the sky and frowned slightly. Now that the Milky Way sword had launched its attack, he couldn't just leave alone like this. After a moment of thought, Qin gritted his teeth and said in a deep voice, "Let's try, just once." Whoosh! Qin's figure went straight to the Milky Way sword in the sky. He looked at the Zerg army that was gathering towards the Milky Way sword and aimed the Zeus technology glove at the Zerg army without hesitation. An extremely powerful force poured out from the Zeus technology glove, instantly wiping out hundreds and thousands of Zerg army. Gotcha! After just one attack, the 3 second-grade starstones that Qin installed on the Zeus technology glove cracked. Qin saw this and waved his hand again without hesitation. In an instant, thousands of Zerg army died in his hands. While he was changing the starstones, Qin had already arrived beside the Milky Way sword. Looking at the mountain that was completely shrouded in a thick purple fog, Qin frowned and whispered, "What is that woman doing?" Before Qin's voice fell, countless white spider silks suddenly shot out from the purple fog, forming a huge spider web in the sky, completely covering the stars in the sky. At the same time, it enveloped Qin and the Milky Way sword. Seeing this scene, Qin's face changed slightly. He subconsciously swung a moonlight slash, but the sharp moonlight slash had no effect on the spider web. It couldn't even cut a single spider silk. What a tough spider silk. Qin was extremely surprised. This thing. Before Qin could finish his words, the Milky Way sword had already rushed into the sky. The sword swept horizontally and cut a piece of spider silk, but there was still a dense mass of spider silk behind it. It was impossible to completely clean it up in a short period of time. Qin saw the Milky Way sword continuously cutting the approaching spider silk, but it couldn't stop the spider silk from advancing steadily. He couldn't help but feel anxious. He tried to bombard the spider silk with all-round thunder prison, but the effect was minimal. I can't let the Milky Way sword fight alone. I have to think of something. At this time, Qin was already a little anxious. If they only relied on the Milky Way sword, they were no match for Shura. Just as Qin was thinking about how to make a difference, the little armor dragon that was sleeping on top of his Yao core suddenly twitched its nose, flew up shakily, and came to the outside world. When it saw the spiderweb that covered the sky, the little armor dragon seemed to have seen something amazing, and an extremely excited expression appeared on its face. It actually opened its mouth and sucked the spiderweb into its stomach. At this time, the little armor dragon's stomach was like a bottomless pit, crazily swallowing the spider's silk in the sky. The dense spiderweb also became thinner because of this. Soon, It could no longer continue to seal the sky, allowing the stars to shine down again. Seeing this scene, Chuan couldn't help but widen his eyes. This little guy could even eat spider silk? Chapter 727. Seeing that the little armored dragon was crazily devouring the spider silk, Chuan did not stay idle. He took out the Zeus technology gloves, which had been replaced with star stones, and launched a series of attacks at the Zerg army below. The attacks organized by the Zerg army were all neutralized in time. At this moment, Shura's incredulous cry suddenly came from afar. How is this possible? Shura seemed to have discovered something extraordinary. Her figure rushed out of the purple mist. Her pair of demonic eyes stared at the little armored dragon that was devouring the spider webs. She said in an incredulous tone, "It's the king of sacred armor? How do you have the king of sacred armor?" Hearing Shura's words, Chuan subconsciously looked at the little armored dragon. So this guy's name is the king of sacred armor? It sounded like it was very powerful. Shura looked at the little armored dragon in the air with a burning gaze. She opened her mouth and made a very strange sound to the little armored dragon. However, the little armored dragon did not seem to hear it. It was still devouring the spider webs in large mouthfuls, completely ignoring Shura. It's not working. Shura was stunned when she saw that the little armored dragon was unmoved. She turned her gaze to Chuan and said in a deep voice, "What did you do to the king of sacred armor?" "How would I know?" Chuan casually killed a group of Zerg army and smiled at Shura. "Is this thing very rare in Zerg?" "What do you know? The king of sacred armor is the beginning of the holy race. It is the symbol of Zerg." Shura roared at Chuan. "I order you to return the king of sacred armor to me immediately." "What a joke." Chuan sneered and said to the little armored dragon, "Suck her dry." The little armored dragon heard Chuan's order and began to devour even more vigorously. In the blink of an eye, it had devoured all the spider webs in the sky. Not a single one was left. After devouring the spider webs, the little armored dragon's body swelled from the size of a thumb to the size of a fist. However, the little armored dragon seemed to be dissatisfied with its current size. After frowning, it shrank back to the size of a thumb. Shura, who was standing at the side, saw that the little armored dragon obeyed Chuan's orders but ignored her. Shura, who was standing, looked at Chuan again and gritted her teeth. "Shura, let's make a deal," she said. "As long as you give me the king, I'll let you live. How about it?" Shura, 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 of Shura, Shura of sacred armor, and Shura, Shura, king of Shura of sacred armor. Shura of Shura of Shura of sacred armor, Shura, Shura. Shura, 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 Shura of Shura of Shura, Shura. Chuan asked curiously, "Is this little thing that important to you? You don't need to know that." Shura did not seem to want Chuan to know the significance of the king of sacred armor. She did not want to answer Chuan's question directly. Chuan did not ask any more questions. Instead, he talked to Shura about his conditions. "I think your deal is very insincere. I can leave on my own now. Do you dare to kill me?" Seeing how shameless Chuan was, Shura could not help but regret telling Chuan that she did not dare to attack him. If Chuan really left with the king of sacred armor, she would regret it for the rest of her life. "What kind of deal do you want to make?" Shura asked Chuan. "As long as I have it, I'll give it to you." Hearing Shura's words, Chuan narrowed his eyes slightly and asked, "What if I want their lives?" As he spoke, Chuan pointed at the Zerg army on the ground. He wanted Shura to kill all the Zerg in the Sword God's ruins with her own hands. He did not believe that Shura would agree to such a condition. If Shura really gritted her teeth and agreed, it meant that the value of the little armored dragon was far more shocking than he had imagined. Shura looked deeply at Chuan and said in a deep voice, "If you really want to use this as a condition of the deal, I can agree to it." As long as Chuan was willing to trade the king of sacred armor to her, she could immediately kill all her fellow Zergs in the Sword God's ruins. Even the loyal old servant Amia was no exception. Compared to the value of the king of sacred armor, these fellow Zergs were simply insignificant. Hearing Shura's words, Qinchuan's expression did not change, but his heart was already in turmoil. He did not expect Shura to be willing to exchange so many Zergs' lives for the little armored dragon. This also made him even more certain that the little armored dragon must have an extraordinary origin. Are you willing or not? Shura seemed to be a little impatient. She could not wait to get the little armor dragon. Qinchuan grinned and said to Shura, "If you don't tell me what this little thing means, I won't make a deal with you." Hearing Qinchuan's request, Shura was furious. She said in a deep voice, "Don't go too far. If you anger me, I'll just destroy everything." "Then give it a try." Qinchuan was not to be outdone. "If worst comes to worst, I'll destroy everything." For Qinchuan, there was no way out. There was no better choice. No matter what Shura was thinking, he was going to fight Shura to the death today. Only the living could get everything they wanted. Seeing Qinchuan's unyielding attitude, Shura could not help but be flustered and exasperated. She roared at Qinchuan. "The king of sacred armor means nothing to you. It means something to you, and that's enough." Qinchuan smiled. "The more anxious you are, the less anxious I am. It's up to you whether you want to tell me or not." Seeing that Qinchuan was so stubborn, Shura was helpless. She could only say to Qinchuan, "The king of sacred armor is the symbol of the holy lord in our holy clan. Only those who are recognized by the king of sacred armor can become the holy lord." Hearing Shura's answer, Qinchuan was stunned. He asked, "What is the holy lord?" Shura coldly replied, "The holy lord is the lord of the holy clan. Do you understand?" This time, Qinchuan finally understood why Shura cared so much about the little armor dragon. It turned out that the little armor dragon was an existence equivalent to the imperial jade seal in Zerg. Since they had already spoken, Shura had no more scruples. He simply said to Qinchuan, "There is only one king of sacred armor in this world. Since the king of sacred armor is with you, it means that the king of sacred armor in the holy clan has died. The holy lord will not live for long. As long as I obtain the king of sacred armor, I can directly succeed the position of holy lord when I return to the holy clan. It is a priceless treasure to me, but to you, it is just a pet." Hearing Shura's words, Qinchuan smiled gently. "What you said is very reasonable, but why should I listen to you?" Chapter 728. Qinchuan, don't push your luck. Shura stared coldly at Qinchuan. She really wanted to cut Qinchuan into 1,000 pieces. Otherwise, it would be difficult to eliminate the hatred in her heart. Qinchuan did not care about Shura's threat. He smiled faintly and said to Shura, "It's not that I'm pushing my luck, but you're too greedy. What do you want?" Shura's last bit of patience was finally completely worn out by Qinchuan. If Qinchuan continued to bargain with her, then she could only choose to die together with him. "I don't want anything." Qinchuan grinned. "Haven't you realized that I'm stalling for time?" Hearing Qinchuan's words, Shura seemed to have thought of something, and her expression changed immediately. At the same time, an extremely bright starlight fell from the sky, completely enveloping Shura. Immediately, an extremely terrifying sword intent fell from the sky and pierced Shura's body in an instant. "Ah!" Shura, whose body was pierced by the sword intent, immediately let out an extremely shrill scream, and her entire body fell to the ground. Seeing this, Qinchuan did not hesitate to aim the Zeus technology glove at Shura. The full energy of 3 second-grade star stones was released, and it fiercely bombarded Shura's body, causing an earth-shattering roar to erupt. Although Shura was continuously attacked, Qinchuan did not think that this could kill Shura. He changed the star stones on the Zeus technology glove while falling to the ground. At this moment, an extremely sharp and long howl suddenly came from the ground, followed by a huge purple spider that was like a mountain. It opened its mouth and spat out countless spider webs at Qinchuan. Faced with this sudden attack, Qin Xuan subconsciously wanted to counterattack with the Zeus technology glove, but he forgot that the star stones on the Zeus technology glove had not been completely replaced. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Countless spider webs wrapped around Qin Xuan's body. In just a breath's time, Qin Xuan was wrapped in a cocoon and then pulled to the ground. Qin Xuan, who was tightly wrapped in the spider webs, could not breathe or move at all. His entire body was stiff like a soldier of death. This also made Qin Xuan realize that the spider webs had an extremely strong, paralyzing effect. If he stayed here for a long time, he would definitely become a zombie. He had to save himself. Just as Qin Xuan was thinking about this, an extremely shocking sword chi from above cut down on the spider webs. At the same time, the little dragon appeared near the spider webs and crazily devoured it. In the blink of an eye, the spider web wrapped around Qin Xuan became thinner, and he could vaguely see the situation outside. Through the cracks, he could vaguely see the situation outside through the gap, and he could see the situation outside. No. Even with the help of the Milky Way sword and the little dragon, we are not a match for Azura. Looking at the scene of the battle between the Milky Way sword and Azura, Qin Xuan immediately came to this conclusion. If they wanted to turn the situation around, they had to rely on the runic sword's help. Taking advantage of the time when the little dragon was devouring the spider webs, Qin Xuan sank his consciousness into his brain. He looked at the runic sword floating in the middle of his brain and immediately went forward to ask for help. "Big brother, help me, I'm going to die soon." In the face of Qin Xuan's request for help, the runic sword did not respond at all, as if it did not hear anything. Although Qin Xuan had already expected this, he still felt helpless in the face of the runic sword's indifference at this moment. "Big brother, what do you want to help? Can you give me a word?" When he saw that the runic sword was still indifferent, Qin Xuan decided to use his ultimate move. "Big brother, since you are not willing to help, then I can only give the little dragon away. Don't blame me if you can't sharpen your sword in the future." As Qin Xuan's voice fell, the runic sword that had not responded until now suddenly moved. The aura on the sword suddenly became sharp. Seeing the change in the runic sword, Qin Xuan really did not know whether to cry or laugh. This guy actually reacted after hearing that the little dragon was going to be given away. It was simply too sad. Without waiting for Qin Xuan to say anything, the runic sword had already disappeared. The next moment, an aura that caused the heavens and earth to tremble appeared in the sword god's ruins. It was like a brilliant sun, shining in all directions. The golden light fell, and everything turned into nothingness. After the spider silk was completely devoured by the little armored dragon, Qin Xuan finally regained his freedom. As he soothed the numbness on his body, he stared at the ground in shock. He really wanted to know what happened just now. Why did the tens of thousands of insectoids disappear in an instant? At this time, the little dragon was also extremely excited. It madly gestured at Qin Xuan. Qin Xuan looked at it for a long time before he said in a daze, "You mean to say that with a swing of the runic sword just now, all the Zerg on the ground died?" The little dragon nodded excitedly, as if saying that such a powerful force was simply too enviable. After receiving the little dragon's response, Qin Xuan was a little dizzy. He originally thought that the runic sword would at least have to fight a few rounds with the Shura before it could defeat the Shura. However, he seriously underestimated the power of the runic sword. With a swing of the runic sword, it actually killed all the Zerg. Not even dregs were left. At this moment, the runic sword, which had done all this, returned to Qin Xuan's mind as if nothing had happened. It was as calm as a horse. "Is that it?" Qin Xuan looked at the bare ground, feeling very unreal. This feeling of leaping into heaven from a hopeless situation was really too dreamy. Just as Qin Xuan was thinking about this, a broken figure suddenly crawled out from the ruins on the ground. She stared at Qin Xuan in the sky in horror and said in an extremely incredulous tone, How did you get the runic sword?" Qin Xuan looked at the Shura who suddenly appeared and frowned slightly. He asked, "You know about the runic sword?" The Shura did not seem to hear Qinchuan's question. Her eyes were about to pop out of their sockets as she screamed hysterically at the sky. The runic land is broken, and the runic sword, why does it still care for the human race? Why? Are the races of the universe really not worthy? What are you talking about? Qin frowned fiercely. Qin still wanted to say something to the Shura, but at this moment, the Shura suddenly lost all signs of life. Her aura dissipated, and her soul was destroyed. Seeing that the Shura had died, Qin, who was curious, could only helplessly ask the runic sword for confirmation. However, the runic sword had no intention of responding to Qin at all. No matter how Qin called out, it did not give any response. Chapter 729. From the time Qin separated from the others to the end of the battle, it only took less than half a day. According to Qin's calculations, the portal should have started to open, but when Qin arrived at the first mountain without any obstructions, he saw a small portal that had been closed. Qin landed on the top of the mountain and looked at the small portal that had lost its luster and was disconnected. He could not help but frown. Why is the portal closed? Did I exceed the time limit? After thinking about it, Qin felt that it was not that he had exceeded the time limit, but that something had happened to the air's center on the other side. As for how this accident happened, he did not want to think about it now, because it was meaningless. There really isn't even the most basic trust between people. Qin sat on the top of the mountain and looked at the gloomy sky in the distance. He could not help but feel disheartened. He had saved everyone and chose to stay here to clear the last obstacle. He did not dare to say that he was selfless, but if it were not for him, the others' journey back would not have been so smooth. Those people kept saying that they would keep the portal open for at least a day for him, but in the end, the portal was closed in less than half a day. Shenfeng had once said that unless he died, the teleportation gate would never be closed. However, Qin guessed that Shenfeng must be living a good life now. Maybe he felt a little guilty in his heart, but time would definitely heal everything. I can't go back. Qin lay down on the top of the mountain. If he had known this would happen, he would have left some Zerg. At least that way, he would not be so bored and could fight Zerg every few days for some fun. Now, he was probably the only living person in the entire Sword God ruins. There was not even anyone to talk to. This made Qin feel like he was locked in Prison 7 again. The only thing he could do to pass the time was to train. Buzz! A clear buzzing sound suddenly rang in Qin's ears. Qin raised his eyes and looked at the Milky Way sword that had suddenly appeared. He was somewhat curious and asked, "What are you trying to do?" The Milky Way sword danced in the air as if it was practicing some sword move. Qin saw this and asked, "Are you saying you want to teach me how to use the sword?" As he spoke, Qin had already sat up from the ground. He smiled and picked up a black branch from the ground. He said to the Milky Way sword, "Then let's practice swordsmanship." Ever since the portal was closed, Tian May had holed herself up in her room, refusing to eat or cultivate. She didn't even want to talk. Seeing Tian May being so passive, the busy Tian Yuan had no choice but to put down his work and rush home. He wanted to have a good talk with Tian May, but Tian May didn't want to see him at all. She didn't even want to hear his voice. Tian May, father's decisions are all for the Air Center and everyone. If you think I'm wrong, then say it. Let's talk calmly, okay? In the eyes of outsiders, Tian Yuan was the dignified chairman of the upper house and the highest leader of the Air Center. But at home, he was just an ordinary father. In the bedroom, Tian May heard Heaven Abyss's words, but she didn't want to pay attention to him. This was because Heaven Abyss was the one who ordered the teleportation gate to be closed. If Heaven Abyss didn't agree, then the teleportation gate wouldn't have been closed. Although Tian Yuan's words were reasonable, and he'd made the decision to close the portal out of consideration for the big picture, Tian May still couldn't accept this fact. Cutting off Qin's way of returning because of something that hadn't happened was murder. Tian May, open the door. Can we talk face to face? Tian Yuan stood in front of the cold bedroom door. his face full of helplessness. He only needed to blow at the door and it would fall down, but he couldn't do that. "Father, you shouldn't put down the work in your hands for me alone. You have to think for everyone." Tian Mei's slightly hoarse voice came from the bedroom. Hearing these sarcastic words, Tian Yuan didn't know what to say. Just then, Tian Mei sent a soul interrogation to Tian Yuan. "Father, if the person who stayed in the Sword God ruins was me, would you have closed the portal too?" Tian Yuan couldn't answer Tian Mei's question. If he answered yes, then their father-daughter relationship would be completely broken. If he answered no, then all the righteous words he'd said before would be nonsense. It would be a slap to his own face. Tian Yuan's silence made Tian Mei couldn't help but sneer. She said in a low voice, "Sure enough, we're all human beings. We're all living beings, but there's also a difference in status. My life is more precious than Qin Chuan in father's eyes, right? Tian Mei, don't destroy our father-daughter relationship for an outsider, okay?" Tian Yuan sighed. "We're father and daughter after all. Blood is thicker than water. Father, go do your thing." Tian Mei had already lost interest in continuing to communicate with Tian Yuan. She already got the answer she wanted. She also knew that she'd made a wrong decision again. If she could have decisively turned around and rushed into the portal when Tian Yuan was hesitating, then the portal wouldn't have been closed. At that time, she'd used the method of returning as a condition to blackmail Qin Chuan to save Shenfeng. However, now that they'd all returned safely, when Qin Chuan was facing a life-and-death crisis, she didn't think of blackmailing Tian Yuan at the first moment. In the end, it was because Qin Chuan wasn't important in her heart. It was also because she'd subconsciously made this distinction in her heart that made her heart incomparably tormented, ashamed, and sad. She should have been able to save Qin Chuan. "Okay, I won't disturb you, but you have to take good care of yourself. Eat on time and cultivate. Don't continue to torture yourself like this." Tian Yuan was helpless. When facing outsiders, he could use thunderous means to intimidate everyone. But facing Tian Mei, he really could not even say a single vicious word. No more sounds came out from Tian Mei's bedroom. Seeing this, Tian Yuan could only turn around and leave, instructing the housekeeper to take good care of Tian Mei and satisfy all of her requests. Tian Yuan walked out of the house and looked at the pale-faced Shenfeng standing at the door. He frowned and asked, "Why are you here?" Shenfeng looked at Tian Yuan with a complicated gaze and said softly, "Chairman, I wish to resign." Hearing Shenfeng's words, Tian Yuan gave Shenfeng a deep glance and asked, "Because of Qin Chuan? I once told Qin Chuan that unless I die, the portal will not be closed. I broke my promise." Shenfeng looked ashamed. "I don't have the face to continue staying in the air center. The matter is already passed." Tian Yuan reached out and patted Shenfeng's shoulder. "You are my right-hand man. In the future, don't say such words so easily." Finished saying these words, Tian Yuan walked forward, leaving Shenfeng standing there in a daze alone. Chapter 730. Sword God's Ruins. On a desolate plain, a tall and straight figure stood there, like an unsheathed sword. His whole body was full of vigor and sharpness, piercing the sky. Beside this figure, a silver-white, long sword danced in the air. It was like a teacher supervising him and pointing out his shortcomings. This man and sword were none other than Qin Chuan and the Milky Way sword who were trapped in the Sword God's ruins. This was Qin Chuan's first month in the Sword God's ruins, and also the first month they were trapped here. In this month, Qin Chuan tried to restart the small portal, but after repeated failures without any results, he simply gave up this unrealistic idea and began to practice swordsmanship in peace. The Milky Way sword was definitely the strongest existence Qin Chuan had ever seen in swordsmanship, and he was also the most suitable teacher. Under the guidance of the Milky Way sword, Qin Chuan's swordsmanship could be said to have improved by leaps and bounds. In the words of the Milky Way sword, it was comparable to the 20-year-old Su Inha. Of course, whether this was the Milky Way sword's words or Qin Chuan's own guess, only Qin Chuan himself knew. Previously, under the guidance of the Lion Duke, Qin Xuan had comprehended the Milky Way sword intent in the Sword God Gorge of the World Mountain. Unfortunately, at that time, he had only condensed the sword heart and had not comprehended the Milky Way sword intent. Now, under the personal guidance of the Milky Way sword intent, Qin Xuan had finally comprehended the Milky Way sword intent and was slowly turning it into his own sword intent. Buzz! Suddenly, a clear humming sound erupted from Qin Xuan's body, as if something was about to break out of his body. At first, this thing was a little rough and didn't have any special characteristics, but as time passed, this thing became more and more exquisite and also more and more sharp. Gradually, it turned into a deep blue sword, exuding an extremely violent energy, fluctuation, rumble. In the gloomy sky, the sound of thunder suddenly resounded. Lightning flashed in the dark clouds, as if a lightning dragon was roaming around endlessly. Sensing the change in Qin Xuan's body, the Milky Way sword could not help but release an extremely sharp sword light that pointed directly at Qin Xuan. More accurately, it was pointing directly at the azure sword in Qin Xuan's body. It wanted to force the sword out of Qin Xuan's body. Facing the Milky Way sword's unstoppable aura, the azure sword was like a newborn calf that did not fear the might of the Milky Way sword at all. It brazenly charged forward. Clang! A mini sword the length of an index finger shot out from Qin Xuan's body and headed straight for the Milky Way sword. It actually clashed with the Milky Way sword. The Milky Way sword didn't counterattack. It only defended, allowing the mini sword to madly attack. As the battle dragged on, the aura of the mini sword became stronger and stronger, more and more shocking. It even had the faint intention of surpassing the Milky Way sword. However, it was a pity that this powerful aura only lasted for a moment before fading away, returning to its normal level. It was only equivalent to 1/3 of the Milky Way sword's aura. During this period of battle, the mini-sword was also unable to cause any damage to the Milky Way sword. It couldn't even break through the sword chi surrounding the Milky Way sword. Return. At this moment, Qin Xuan suddenly opened his mouth and shouted at the mini-sword. The mini-sword that was fighting with the Milky Way sword immediately stopped fighting when it heard Qin Xuan's call. It whizzed back to Qin Xuan's side and flew around Qin Xuan. Qin Xuan looked at the mini-sword that was flying around him and slowly reached out his hand. The mini-sword gently landed in Qin Xuan's hand, allowing Qin Xuan to play with it. Is this the sword intent that I have cultivated? It was born out of the Milky Way sword intent and formed its own style. Qin Xuan looked at the mini-sword in his hand and couldn't help but reveal a hint of joy on his face. He asked the Milky Way sword, "What do you think of my sword intent?" Hearing Qin Xuan's words, the Milky Way sword hummed, as if it was quite satisfied with Qin Xuan's sword intent. After receiving the Milky Way sword's response, Qin Xuan once again looked at the mini-sword in his hand and smiled. "Should I give you a name? Since you were born out of the Milky Way sword intent, why don't you call it the Thunder River sword intent?" Hearing Qin Xuan's words, the mini-sword shook crazily. Obviously, it was extremely against this extremely lame name. Even a Milky Way sword intent felt a little uncomfortable. Qin Xuan's standard of naming was too embarrassing. Seeing that the mini-sword was so against the name Thunder River Sword Intent, Qin Xuan coughed lightly and said, "I was just joking. Actually, I want to name you God's Sword Intent." God's Sword Intent. Hearing Qin Xuan say this name, the mini-sword stopped shaking. However, the Milky Way sword was dissatisfied. This name sounded even more superior than it was. "Look, the Milky Way sword intent is the sword intent of sword god Su Inha, and you were born out of it. This means that you are more or less related to sword god Su Inha. So, isn't it very appropriate to call it God's sword intent?" Qin Xuan grinned. The Milky Way sword intent is the first generation of God's sword intent. You are the second generation of God's sword intent. After Qin Xuan's twisted logic, the Milky Way sword intent and the mini-sword reluctantly accepted Qin Xuan's reason. From then on, the mini-sword had a new name, God's sword intent. However, the current god sword intent had just been born and was still very weak. Qin Chuan needed a lot of time to nurture it. It would take some time before it could be used in a real battle. The reason why the god sword intent had been so fierce before was purely because the Milky Way sword did not counterattack. If the Milky Way sword wanted to counterattack, it would only need one hit to defeat the god sword intent. In the end, Qin Chuan had just started on the path of swordsmanship. He was still far from mastering it. It's been a month, and still no one has come. It seems that I have really been abandoned. Qin Chuan looked at the mountain peak not far away. During this month, he had not left this area. He had been waiting for the center of Kunlun's field to send someone over. However, after a month, there was no news. This made Qin Chuan completely give up on the center of Kunlun's field. If he wanted to go back, he would have to rely on himself. Just as Qin Chuan was thinking about this, silver dots of light suddenly appeared in the sky. These dots of light were very small at first, but they quickly connected together. Vaguely, the roars of some creature could be heard through the silver dots of light. Qin Chuan looked up at the sudden change in the sky with a puzzled expression. When he saw a snow-white fox-like creature suddenly emerge from the silver light spots, Qin Chuan could not help but be stunned. He said subconsciously, "This is a star beast." Chapter 731. When Qin Chuan discovered the sudden appearance of these star beasts also discovered the existence of Qin Chuan. They let out a sharp hiss and then pounced towards Qin Chuan from the sky. So. Dozens of star foxes were extremely fast, and in the blink of an eye, they arrived in front of Qin Chuan. When Qin Chuan subconsciously wanted to attack these star foxes nimbly dodged, causing Qin Chuan to pounce on empty air. What a fast speed! Qin Chuan was a little surprised. The speed of these star foxes actually made him feel dazzled. These star foxes surrounded Qin Chuan and kept jumping and spinning, completely sealing off Qin Chuan. Seeing this scene, Qin Chuan was not in a hurry to make a move. He wanted to see what kind of tricks these star foxes were planning to play. As the silver-white light spots in the sky grew larger and larger, the number of star foxes entering the sword god's ruins also increased. In just a short moment, the number of star foxes surrounding Qin Chuan had already exceeded 1,000. Qin Chuan raised his head and looked at the sky. At this time, there were no longer any star foxes appearing in the silver-white light spots. This also made Qin Chuan realize that the number of star foxes standing in front of him was all of them. Star foxes are one of the more gentle star beasts. According to common sense, they shouldn't have such a strong offensive ability. The behavior of these star foxes is a little too abnormal. Just as Qin Chuan was thinking about this, another star fox emerged from the silver-white light spots in the sky. This star fox was much larger than the other star foxes, and its entire body was dripping with blood. Its aura was weak, as if it had suffered an extremely serious injury. Seeing this scene, Qin Chuan immediately understood. It turned out that these star foxes did not surround him to attack him, but to protect the injured star fox in the sky. It seemed that the injured star fox should be the Star Fox King. However, what made Qin Chuan curious was who had caused such a serious injury to the Star Fox King. Judging from its aura, this Star Fox King is barely comparable to the late Gold Core stage. It should be a very weak existence among the many Star Beast Kings. It is understandable that it would be injured. Just as Qin Chuan was thinking about this, a pitch-black vortex suddenly appeared beside the silver-white light spot in the sky. A mysterious star beast covered in black mist leaped out from it. The appearance of this star beast caused a disturbance in the Star Fox army. They actually abandoned Qin Chuan and rushed towards the mysterious star beast. Qin Chuan narrowed his eyes at the mysterious star beast and whispered, "This seems to be a mutant star beast." Mutated star beasts were a very special existence among the huge group of star beasts. Every mutated star beast was unique. No one knew how mutated star beasts were born, but no one could deny their strength. Whoosh! Faced with the attack of the star foxes, the black mist around the mutated star beast suddenly dispersed and rushed towards the Star Fox army. Seeing this, the seriously injured Star Fox King immediately let out a weak cry and commanded the Star Fox army to retreat. Obviously, it knew how powerful the black mist of the mutated star beast was and did not want its tribe to sacrifice in vain. The Star Fox army retreated, but the mutated star beast did not spare them. It chased after them crazily, like a cat playing with a mouse. Qin Chuan stood on the ground and looked at the scene in front of him with interest. In his opinion, the Star Fox army was definitely no match for this mutated star beast. If the Star Fox army had a way to deal with this mutated star beast, they would not have been chased here. I don't know what special abilities this mutated star beast has. Compared to the Star Fox army, Qin Chuan was obviously more interested in the mutated star beast. He wanted to see what other abilities this mutated star beast had. After all, after the Star Fox army was wiped out, it would be his turn to fight the mutated star beast. He did not think that the mutated star beast would ignore him and leave directly after killing the Star Fox army. Just as Qin Chuan was happily watching the show, the Star Fox King suddenly descended from the sky and landed in front of him. Seeing the Star Fox King suddenly appear beside him, Qin Chuan was slightly stunned. Was this guy trying to drag him down? Under Qin Chuan's gaze, the Star Fox King's face showed a touch of anthropomorphic sadness. It looked at Qin Chuan with a pleading look in its scarlet eyes, as if it wanted to ask Qin Chuan to save it and its tribe. You want me to save you? Qin Chuan pointed at himself, and then at the mutated star beast in the sky. The Star Fox King nodded at Qin Chuan, and then actually knelt down in front of Qin Chuan, showing its submission. Qin Chuan understood the Star Fox King's intention. As long as he was willing to defeat the mutated star beast and save the Star Fox King and its tribe, the Star Fox King would be willing to submit to him. Although Qin Chuan was a little tempted by the Star Fox King's offer, it was limited because compared to the Star Fox King, he wanted the mutated star beast to submit to him more. However, mutated star beasts were extremely proud. Since ancient times, no one had been able to tame a mutated star beast. The possibility of Qin Chuan succeeding was very slim. However, even if he could not make the mutated star beast submit to him, it would be a good thing to get the Star Fox King to submit to him. Thinking of this, Qin Chuan did not plan to continue watching. He directly rose into the air and blocked the black fog that was chasing the Star Fox army with his sword aura. Faced with Qin Chuan's sudden intervention, the mutated star beast let out an extremely irritable growl, as if warning Qin Chuan not to meddle in other people's business. Qin Chuan looked at the mutated star beast and laughed. It is said that mutated star beasts have very high intelligence. You should be able to understand what I'm saying. The mutated star beast roared at Qin Chuan again, and then the black fog surrounding it slowly dispersed, revealing its body. What surprised Qin Chuan was that this mutated star beast turned out to be a black star fox. So this mutated star beast is actually from this Star Fox clan. Qin Chuan was a little surprised and whispered, "Am I meddling in other people's business?" Thinking of this, Qin Chuan could not help but frown slightly. He hesitated. It seemed that this matter was not as simple as he thought. He should not interfere rashly. Just as Qin Chuan was thinking of this, a black fog suddenly emerged around him and shrouded him. The mutated star beast had taken advantage of Qin Chuan's distraction and suddenly attacked Qin Chuan. However, this mutated star beast had underestimated Qin Chuan, or rather, it had underestimated the Milky Way sword flying beside Qin Chuan. Chapter 732. Buzz. The Milky Way sword let out a low hum and shot out a sharp sword aura at the black fog surrounding Qin Chuan. The sword aura tore the black fog into pieces almost instantly and rescued Qin Chuan. After Qin Chuan was freed, he looked at the mutant star beast and said in a deep voice, "You are not a mutant star beast of the Star Fox clan. You were the one who changed your appearance." The reason why Qin Chuan was so sure was that after being shrouded in the black fog, the scenery of Star Dragon City appeared in front of him. This also made Qin Chuan realize that the mutant star beast was an expert in illusions. The mutant star beast must have deliberately changed its appearance to that of a star fox to confuse him. The mutant star beast did not attack Qin Chuan again because it was afraid of the Milky Way sword beside Qin Chuan. It had a premonition that it might die under the sword today, just as the mutant star beast was hesitating whether to retreat or not. The Milky Way sword had already launched its second attack. The tip of the sword was pointed at the mutant star beast, and the sword pierced out with a dazzling light. Hiss! The mutant star beast was attacked by the Milky Way sword and immediately let out an extremely sharp and painful cry. The black fog surrounding it dissipated a lot, and its aura became a little weak. Qin Chuan immediately judged that the black fog should be the body of the mutant star beast. Attacking the black fog was equivalent to attacking the mutant star beast. This is a star beast without a body. Qin Chuan was very surprised. It was the first time he had seen such a strange star beast. Just as Qin Chuan was thinking about these things, the mutated star beast had already made the decision to escape under the threat of death. It turned around and rushed towards the black vortex, wanting to leave the sword god's ruins. How could Qin Chuan let it do as it wished? He immediately weaved a net with the power of thunder and enveloped the mutated star beast. However, at this time, the mutated star beast decisively left most of its body behind. Only a small part of it successfully escaped through the gaps between the thunder net. With a whoosh, it drilled into the black vortex and disappeared. Seeing this scene, Qin Chuan was a little surprised. He could not help but praise. What a brave man! How decisive! The mutant star beast abandoned most of its body, although it caused its strength to drop. At least it managed to save its own life. Now Qin Chuan and the Milky Way sword could only watch the mutant star beast leave regretfully. They did not dare to chase it through the black vortex. It's a pity. Qin Chuan looked at the black fog that was wandering irregularly in the air. He took out a jade bottle and collected the black fog. Although this thing was useless to him, if he saw Lu Zi in the future, it could be a very good gift for Lu Zi. After collecting the black fog, Qin Chuan looked at the Star Fox King on the ground. He slowly landed beside the Star Fox King and asked, "Does the promise you just made still count?" When the Star Fox King heard Qin Chuan's words, it stood up from the ground and walked to Qin Chuan without hesitation. Then it knelt down in front of Qin Chuan. Qin Chuan put his hand on the Star Fox King's head. With a burst of starlight, Qin Chuan and the Star Fox King formed a master-servant contract. When the contract was completed, Qin Chuan looked at the Star Fox King and chuckled. "What's your name?" Bai Wei greets the master. The Star Fox King, called Bai Wei, knelt before Qin Chuan and was very respectful. "You are injured. You need to rest. There are some things we can talk about after you recover." Qin Chuan took out special healing potions and special nutrition potions from his storage ring and gave them to Bai Wei, telling her to rest well. "Thank you for your kindness, master." Bai Wei gratefully accepted Qin Chuan's special healing potions and special nutrition potions. She really needed these two things. After settling down the Star Fox clan, Qin Chuan returned to the cave at the top of the mountain to rest. Through the entrance of the cave, he could see the dark sky in the distance and the gradually dissipating silver-white light spots. Star beasts have the ability to travel in the universe and break through space barriers. Can I use the Star Fox King's ability to travel in the universe and take the initiative to find the center of the Kunlun field? If anyone heard Qin Chuan's words, they would be shocked. In the past, no one had ever thought of traveling in the universe with a star beast. Not to mention the problem of ability, just the problem of survival in the universe was very difficult to solve. After all, humans were not star beasts. Humans needed to breathe. Even cultivators could not stay in a vacuum for a long time. However, for Qin Chuan, this should be the only way he could think of to leave the Sword God ruins and return to the center of the Kunlun field. Therefore, no matter what the outcome was, he had to try. If he did not have this idea, he would not have immediately taken action to help the Star Fox King after Bai Wei asked for help. "I hope my idea is not whimsical." Qin Chuan sighed. Year after year, ever since I entered the center of the Kunlun field, my life has really been full of misfortune. Just as Qin Chuan was lamenting about this, a snow-white figure suddenly appeared outside the cave. She softly shouted into the cave, by way requests to see Master. Qin Chuan raised his eyebrows slightly. He got up and walked out of the cave. As he walked, he asked Bai Wei, "Didn't I tell you to recover? Why are you here so soon?" As he spoke, Qin Chuan had already walked out of the cave. When he saw that Bai Wei's injuries had all healed, he asked in surprise, "You recovered so quickly?" "Master, although my Star Fox clan doesn't have any particularly strong talent in battle, our Star Fox clan's recovery ability is second to none," Bai Wei explained to Qin Chuan in a low voice. "If I did not have such amazing recovery ability, I would not have been able to last until the moment I saw Master." Without waiting for Qin Chuan to ask again, Bai Wei continued, "Master now has the recovery ability of the Star Fox King. As my strength increases, Master's recovery ability will also become stronger and stronger." Qin Chuan's eyes lit up. This was a pleasant surprise for him. Bai Wei looked at Qin Chuan and said in a low voice, "Master, you seemed to have something to say to me earlier?" Qin Chuan nodded and asked Bai Wei, "Do you know the center of the Kunlun field?" Bai Wei thought for a moment and asked, "Master, are you talking about the gathering place of the human and demon race? Although I have not been there, I have heard of it." Qin Chuan was a bit excited. "Do you know the way there?" Bai Wei nodded and answered, "Of course I know the way." Chapter 733. When he heard Bai Wei say that she knew the way to the center of Kunlun field, Qin Chuan could not help but smile excitedly. However, after a moment of excitement, Qin Chuan calmed down. He knew that now was not the time to be excited. Bai Wei only knew the way. Whether or not he could follow Bai Wei was still unknown. "Can I move in the universe with you?" Hearing Qin Chuan's question, Bai Wei could not help but be shocked. After thinking for a while, she asked Qin Chuan, "Master, are you talking about moving in the universe with your physical body?" Qin Chuan nodded. If he had an interstellar shuttle, he would not have to ask this question. "Master, it is very difficult for you to move freely in the universe with your current level. I also do not have the ability to protect you from outside interference." Bai Wei said to Qin Chuan regretfully, "Both our levels are too low." Hearing Bai Wei's words, Qin Chuan frowned slightly and asked, "According to what you said, if both of our levels are high enough, we can move freely in the universe." Bai Wei nodded and said to Qin Chuan, "But at least I have to reach the true Star King realm, and Master has to reach the nascent soul stage of the human race." The Star King realm that Bai Wei was talking about was the same as the Devil King realm. They were both equivalent to the nascent soul stage of the human race. This meant that when Bai Wei became a Star King and Qin Chuan reached the nascent soul stage, they could leave the Sword God ruins and enter the universe. Before that, there was basically no chance. "We still need time." Qin Chuan sighed regretfully. It seemed that it would be impossible for him to return to the center of Kunlun field in a short period of time. Bai Wei saw Qin Chuan sigh and asked in confusion, "Master, don't you have a way to go back?" "It's a long story." Qin Chuan smiled bitterly and said to Bai Wei, "I am trapped here." When Bai Wei heard this, she said to Qin Chuan, "Master, I will definitely work hard in my cultivation and strive to advance to the Star King realm as quickly as possible." Hearing Bai Wei's words, Qin Chuan curiously asked her, "What are the requirements for star beasts to cultivate?" Bai Wei answered Qin Chuan, "We star beasts need to absorb star power to practice. Star power is the light of the stars in space. We absorb the light into our bodies and convert it into star power." Hearing Bai Wei's words, Qin Chuan subconsciously looked up at the sky. The sky was gloomy. Aside from the dark clouds, nothing could be seen. In such an environment, it would be difficult for Bai Wei to cultivate. Bai Wei seemed to know what Qin Chuan was thinking, so she said to Qin Chuan, "I can break space barriers when I practice and go to the universe to practice." "I see." Qin Chuan laughed. "I was worried for nothing." After laughing, Qin Xuan asked Bai Wei, "Do you think you can become a Star King in 2 years?" Hearing Qin Xuan, Bai Wei thought for a moment and said, "There is hope, but it depends on how fast you can improve. Are you saying that my cultivation speed will affect you?" Qin Xuan raised his eyebrows slightly. "The faster my cultivation speed, the faster your cultivation speed will be?" "Yes." Bai Wei nodded. "Because of the master-servant contract, my cultivation cannot exceed masters. Once I exceed masters, there is a possibility of a backlash. Therefore, master's cultivation speed will directly affect my cultivation speed." Qin Xuan's eyes couldn't help but reveal a wisp of understanding when he heard Bai Wei's explanation. He glanced at Bai Wei and said, "Don't worry, I won't delay your cultivation." Time passed quickly. In the blink of an eye, another year had passed. Qin Xuan did not expect that he would be locked in a new prison just a few days after he escaped from the 7th prison. Compared to the boring practice life in the 7th prison, Qin Xuan was relatively comfortable in the Sword God's ruins. He had the Milky Way sword to guide him in his practice, and he could play with the star foxes when he was not practicing. It was a carefree life. Of course, in this 1 year, Qin Xuan's progress in his cultivation was also very obvious. Now, he was already at the perfected Golden Core realm, only one step away from transcending the tribulation and becoming a nascent soul cultivator. Just as Qin Xuan was playing with the star foxes, a silver-white light spot suddenly appeared in the dark sky. Seeing this light spot, Qin Xuan knew that Bai Wei had returned from her practice. Bai Wei's snow-white figure passed through the silver-white light spot and returned to the Sword God's ruins. She slowly landed beside Qin Xuan and whispered to Qin Xuan, "Master, fortunately, I did not disappoint you. Now I'm only one step away from becoming Star King." Hearing Bai Wei's answer, Qin Xuan could not help but show a touch of relief on his face. He sighed and said, "I have been waiting for this day for a long time." As early as a month ago, Qin Xuan was already in the Golden Core realm. During this month, he did not focus on his practice. Instead, he was seriously adjusting his state from his body to his soul. And this kind of adjustment was naturally to welcome the nascent soul thunder tribulation that would come soon. Bai Wei looked at Qin Xuan and said with a smile, "When Master advances to the nascent soul realm, my realm will also increase. This way, I will not be far from the goal that Master has set." "Yes, it's not far." Qin Xuan looked up at the sky. "The way home is right in front of me." On the top of the mountain, Qin Xuan looked up at the sky with an exceptionally solemn expression. Rumble. Lightning rolled in the thick dark clouds, and the sound of thunder resounded in all directions. It was as if some terrifying power was gathering. "Master, the nascent soul thunder tribulation is no small matter. Please be careful." Bai Wei looked at Qin Xuan's back with a slightly complicated expression. It was no exaggeration to say that Qin Xuan was definitely the youngest human cultivator with the highest cultivation that she had ever seen. Hearing Bai Wei's words, Qin Xuan pursed his lips and said to Bai Wei, "If I fail to pass the tribulation, I will break the master-servant contract with you at the last moment. After I die, I hope that you can bring my belongings to the center of the heirs field and give them to my friends. I have written their names on that piece of paper. You can see it." Hearing this, Bai Wei immediately said to Qin Xuan, "Master, you will be fine." "I hope so." Qin Xuan once again raised his head and gazed at the thick tribulation clouds in the sky. Back then, when he was undergoing the Golden Core lightning tribulation, he had a slim chance of survival. It was exceptionally dangerous. Now that he was about to undergo the nascent soul lightning tribulation, he was afraid that it would be even more terrifying than the Golden Core lightning tribulation. However, some terrors could not be overcome with confidence. "Come, let me see how difficult the nascent soul thunder tribulation is." Chapter 734. When the tribulation clouds in the sky were so large that they covered the entire sky and no one could see the end of it, Qin Xuan's nascent soul thunder tribulation was finally about to descend. Rumble. Amidst the deafening roar of thunder, Qinchuan's first thunder tribulation descended. The first thunder tribulation was a shocking purple thunder tribulation. When the power of the thunder tribulation struck Qinchuan's body, the violent power almost instantly tore apart the robes on Qinchuan's body. Qinchuan's flesh was split open and his flesh was bleeding profusely. However, a powerful life force emerged from Qinchuan's body and repaired his body, allowing Qinchuan to return to his original state in the blink of an eye. However, although his physical injuries could be repaired, the pain that penetrated deep into his bones and even his soul could not be reduced in the slightest. Ahem, Qinchuan grunted. He endured the pain in his body and tried his best to absorb the majestic power contained in the power of the thunder tribulation to strengthen himself. However, before he could completely absorb and refine the power of the first thunder tribulation, the second thunder tribulation descended. On the plains in the distance, Bai Wei looked at Qinchuan, who was undergoing the thunder tribulation. A trace of fear flashed through her large eyes. The thunder tribulation that Qinchuan was undergoing was definitely the most terrifying she had ever seen in her life. If it were her, perhaps the first thunder tribulation would have killed her directly. Master's really strong. Bai Wei had to admit that Qinchuan was really too strong. If Qinchuan was not strong enough, the power of the thunder tribulation would not be so terrifying. In the past, Qinchuan was only talented. This thunder tribulation was the time for him to exchange his potential for strength. Once he succeeded, Qinchuan's strength would soar by leaps and bounds. As the thunder tribulation descended one after another, Qinchuan had already withstood 5 consecutive thunder tribulations. However, each time was incomparably difficult, and he was on the verge of collapse. Under such heavy pressure, Qinchuan was almost giving it his all. Power of Nirvana. Under the bombardment of the 6th thunder tribulation, Qinchuan had no choice but to release the power of Nirvana from the true meaning of the phoenix. He used the power of Nirvana to quickly restore his body and strength. This was originally a trump card that Qinchuan wanted to use at the end. He did not expect that he would use it at the 6th thunder tribulation. However, the thunder tribulation did not give Qinchuan any chance to breathe. Instantly, the 7th thunder tribulation's power to descend. Bang! Under the bombardment of the lightning tribulation, the mountain that Qinchuan was standing on finally let out a wail as it could no longer bear the burden. With a loud bang, it turned into flying rocks that filled the sky. Under the attack of the lightning tribulation, it turned into flying ash and dissipated in the air. As for Qinchuan, he was ruthlessly smashed into the ground by this attack. Crash! Qinchuan crawled out from the rubble and pushed aside the rubble beside him. He panted violently as he lifted his head to look at the sky. When he saw the 8th lightning tribulation that was about to take shape, a tinge of fear finally surfaced in his eyes. The power of the nascent soul stage thunder tribulation was more terrifying than he imagined. Just the first 7 thunder tribulations have already used up most of the trump cards I prepared. There are still 2 more powerful thunder tribulations after that. Qinchuan's face revealed a fierce expression. He looked up to the sky and roared, releasing his complete form. He wanted to face the thunder tribulation in his current strongest form. Even if he died under the thunder tribulation, he wanted to die standing. At the moment when Qinchuan released his complete form, the 8th thunder tribulation arrived as scheduled. The thunder tribulation, which had already turned into a pitch-black color, descended from the sky like a swimming dragon. It roared and bombarded Qinchuan, exploding with an astonishing power fluctuation that caused the heavens and earth to tremble. With Qinchuan as the center, the ground within 1,000 miles was directly turned into nothingness, turning into a huge, deep pit. Bang! Qinchuan's body slammed into the bottom of the deep pit. The black power of the thunder tribulation wandered around Qinchuan's body, crazily attacking Qinchuan's body. At the same time, it also provided Qinchuan with a powerful force, causing Qinchuan's aura to suddenly soar. Qinchuan really loved and hated the power of the 8th Thunder Tribulation. He hated it because the power of the Thunder Tribulation caused too much damage to Qin Chuan, but he loved it because the power of the Thunder Tribulation provided Qin Chuan with a powerful force, causing his strength to undergo a qualitative leap. But now, no matter how strong Qin Chuan's aura was, he was not a nascent soul stage cultivator. He was only one step away from becoming a nascent soul stage cultivator. If he crossed this threshold, then he would be like a fish in a vast sea. If he could not cross this threshold, then all his previous efforts would be in vain. Come on. Qin Chuan, who was covered in wounds from head to toe, stood in the ruins and looked up at the sky. He was absolutely unwilling to die like this, so he had to face the Thunder Tribulation head-on and live through death. In the face of Qin Chuan's angry roar, the Thunder Tribulation clouds in the sky seemed to feel provoked and immediately erupted with a deafening roar. All the power gathered together and turned into an extremely black Thunder Tribulation cloud. Seeing the changes in the Thunder Tribulation clouds, Qin Chuan could not help but think of his experience when he was undergoing the Golden Core Thunder Tribulation. At that time, the last Thunder Tribulation he faced was only a touch of extreme black. But now he had to face an entire stretch of extreme black. The shocking amount would cause an absolute qualitative change. Just as Qin Chuan was thinking of this, the qualitative change finally came. A golden light appeared in the thick black Thunder Tribulation clouds. The golden light penetrated the Thunder Tribulation clouds and illuminated the entire world, causing Qin Chuan to be completely shocked. That was a golden Thunder Tribulation, the center of the Kunlun field, the world within a world. In a lounge specially arranged for the preparatory Kunlun field in the world within a world within a world, Lu Zi, who was sound asleep, suddenly woke up. She sat up abruptly and panted heavily. Her face was full of cold sweat after the shock, as if she had had a nightmare. Long Xiao, who was sitting beside her, saw that Lu Zi had woken up and asked with concern, "What happened to you?" Hearing Long Xiao's voice, Lu Zi looked up at Lu Zi and said with a hoarse voice, "I just had a nightmare. I dreamed that Qin Chuan was undergoing the Golden Core Thunder Tribulation and he died in the dream." Long Xiao was slightly stunned when she heard Lu Zi's words. Then, a look of helplessness flashed across her eyes, and she said to Lu Zi, "Don't think too much. It's just a dream. Moreover, Qin Chuan is already a Golden Core cultivator. Why would he undergo another Golden Core Thunder Tribulation?" "I know." As she spoke, Lu Zi had already stood up and picked up the training clothes beside her. Long Xiao was surprised to see Lu Zi's actions and asked, "What are you doing?" Lu Zi replied simply, "I'm going to train." "But you just finished training and rested for less than half an hour." Long Xiao frowned and said, "Your body won't be able to take it." Lu Zi turned back and looked at Long Xiao deeply. "I won't think too much only when I'm training. He's already waited for me for 4 years. I really don't have much time left." Chapter 735. Sword God Ruins. Bai Wei stood at the edge of the deep pit and looked at the bottomless pit. A complicated look flashed through her eyes. Just 10 minutes ago, Qin Chuan severed the master-servant contract between them. She regained her freedom, but Qin Chuan disappeared without a trace under the terrifying golden lightning tribulation. She didn't know whether Qin Chuan was dead or alive. But no matter whether Qin Chuan was dead or alive, she had to do her best. Qin Chuan had saved her life before, and now it was time for her to repay his kindness. All clansmen, listen up. Immediately go into the pit and search for traces of Master. Even if you have to dig through the ground, you have to find Master. If he's alive, if he's dead. Before Bai Wei finished speaking, a golden light suddenly emerged from the pitch-black pit. Seeing the golden light appear, Bai Wei's eyes flashed with surprise. Could Master still be alive? Under Bai Wei's gaze, the golden light slowly flew out of the pit and landed in front of Bai Wei. Looking at the mini sword wrapped in the golden light that was on the verge of breaking, Bai Wei almost instantly recognized it. This was Qinchuan's god's sword intent. The fact that the god's sword intent hadn't dissipated meant that Qinchuan was still alive. When the god's sword intent turned the tip of the sword to the northwest, Bai Wei understood. The god's sword intent was reminding her that Qinchuan was in the northwest. Whoosh! Countless star foxes quickly rushed to the northwest and quickly cleared the rocks there. Soon, they found traces of Qinchuan among the rocks. Bai Wei originally thought that Qinchuan should be in a state of near death, but in fact, Qinchuan's condition was extremely good. His entire body was intact, and there weren't any wounds. But what Bai Wei found strange was that she couldn't feel Qinchuan's presence at all. This is Bai Wei doubtfully checked Qinchuan's physical condition. She found that the strength of Qinchuan's body had completely surpassed before the tribulation. He could definitely be considered strong among nascent soul cultivators. The spiritual power in his body was also extremely abundant. His dantian had turned into a vast ocean, and his spiritual power seemed to be endless. From all aspects, Qinchuan was definitely a nascent soul cultivator. But if she didn't see this with her own eyes, she wouldn't be able to sense Qinchuan's existence at all. It was as if Qinchuan's body was still there, but his soul had disappeared. Just as Bai Wei was puzzled, the Milky Way sword suddenly appeared beside Qinchuan. It circled Qinchuan a few times, then suddenly made a stabbing motion toward Qinchuan. However, the tip of the sword stopped when it was 1 centimeter away from Qinchuan's chest. But Qinchuan didn't react at all. Master's current condition is very strange. It seems like his soul has left his body. Bai Wei frowned slightly. This is the first time I've encountered something like this. The Milky Way sword didn't know what was going on with Qinchuan. It tried to enter Qinchuan's mind to check on the runic sword, but it was rejected. At this time, Qinchuan's mind was like an iron cage, completely sealing off all exits. But judging from the situation of the god's sword intent, Qinchuan shouldn't be dead. Just as the Milky Way sword and Bai Wei were puzzled about Qinchuan's condition, Qinchuan's consciousness was in a strange space. Qinchuan looked at the huge, floating continent in front of him, and a hint of doubt flashed in his eyes. He murmured in a low voice, "This is the runic land?" Qinchuan still remembered the scene he saw when he first came into contact with the secret of the bronze box. A huge continent shattered, and countless stone pillars inscribed with runes shattered. He didn't expect that after he advanced to the nascent soul stage, the scene he saw back then would appear in front of his eyes again, and it seemed a little different. Back then, Qinchuan saw nothing in the runic land other than the stone pillars inscribed with runes. But this time, he saw the existence of other creatures in the runic land. In the sky above the runic land, 2 huge figures stood opposite each other. The aura of these 2 figures was extremely vast, and their momentum was as strong as the blazing sun. It was so bright that people couldn't look directly at them. Qinchuan felt as weak as an ant in front of these 2 figures. Qinchuan couldn't hear the 2 figures talking, and he didn't know what they were doing. But when one of the figures took out a golden sword, Qinchuan was stunned. This sword was almost exactly the same as the runic sword in his mind, but in terms of aura, this sword was countless times stronger than the runic sword. This should be the runic sword. It's just that the runic sword hasn't recovered to its peak state yet. Just as Qinchuan was thinking about this, the 2 huge figures began the handover ceremony. However, what was unexpected was that when the first figure handed the runic sword to the second figure, the golden light emitted by the second figure suddenly turned into a rich black. The aura also changed from strong and domineering to gloomy and evil. The moment the aura changed, the aura of the 2 figures became entangled, and an earth-shattering battle broke out. During the confrontation between the 2 figures, the runic land trembled violently and was shattered by the aftermath of the confrontation. It turned into countless fragments that scattered in all directions and dissipated into the universe. Seeing this scene, Qinchuan finally understood why the runic land shattered. As the runic land shattered, the aura of the golden figure that was blazing like the sun suddenly withered and became extremely weak. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the black evil figure waved the runic sword in his hand and stabbed at the golden figure. The power of the runic sword pierced through the universe and was about to strangle the golden figure. At this critical moment, the golden figure suddenly swelled, and its aura became extremely chaotic. It actually exploded in an instant and dyed the entire universe gold. In this earth-shattering explosion that seemed to annihilate everything, the black figure's aura withered and then quickly retreated. The runic sword was on the verge of shattering and flew into the distance like the shattered runic land. Qinchuan was like a customer watching a movie. He stared at the scene in front of him with his mouth agape. Just as he was curious about the fate of the black figure, the scene suddenly cut off. His consciousness began to sink rapidly and became a little blurry. Boom! With an extremely violent thunder, Qinchuan suddenly opened his eyes. This time, what appeared in front of him was no longer the two towering figures in the universe, but the Milky Way sword and byway. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.